At the beginning of Chapter 1, the children were begging someone. One girl whispered that the children had been bullied, while the other girl mumbled that making such young children perform Dajiza was too much. Gray thought that the situation was sudden, but he was what was probably known as a transmigrator. It was only probably because he periodically recalled memories from his previous life. This world closely resembled that one. It was the world of the super popular game Bright Fantasy. Gray had bought the game after watching his friend play it, but he had never even broken the seal, so he knew very little about it. All he knew was that it was a command-style RPG with many heroines whose marriage routes depended on the player's choices. He also knew that Bright was a world of sword and sorcery and that the protagonist's default name was Isoka. That was about the extent of his knowledge. Gray's name was Gray. Because of his mean-looking face, he was often mistaken for a thug, and he had probably reincarnated as an evil background character. Back in the present, the children were bowing before him. Since he did not know his role in the game, he had decided to become an adventurer instead. It was an honorable profession in which adventurers gathered daily at the guild to accept and complete numerous quests. Their ranks advanced from E to D to C until eventually reaching A. Every rank also had a minus and a plus, which Gray found bothersome. For example, the order within rank D, from low to high, was D followed by D+. There were predetermined trials for promotion, such as completing 3 C-rank quests consecutively to qualify for B rank. There were many other rules, but he had not paid much attention to them. Gray had diligently climbed the rank. He was skilled in many forms of magic, including attack, healing, buff, and debuff magic, and he could also wield a sword. As a B-rank adventurer, he could hold his head high anywhere. He told the children to stop performing Dajiza. By then, other people had begun whispering that the children might be sold, and some had already called the guards. Gray stared at the crowd, thinking that every one of them was judging a book by its cover. One of the children admitted that it was shameless but asked whether Gray would heal their sick family member with the healing magic he had used earlier. The girl also pleaded with him. Gray wondered how the situation had reached that point. Earlier that day, the boy had asked a passerby to buy a flower. The man had shouted that he did not want the worthless flower before kicking the boy. Gray had suddenly appeared, kicked the man in return, and then approached the boy and the girl to ask them to sell him a flower. Returning to the present, Gray realized they were asking for his healing magic. He asked whether the sick person was a parent or a sibling. The boy explained that they had neither parents nor real family and that the sick person was a friend who lived with them. Gray frowned. Healing magic only treated external injuries, while illnesses could only be cured by church priests, and only high-ranking ones at that. Even so, after seeing the 2 children groveling before him, he agreed to help. They were surprised. He explained that he could not promise it would work, but if they accepted that, they could show him where their family was. Privately, he wondered whether the cure potion he possessed would be effective. The boy explained that they could not repay him. Gray thought there was no need to rush because they lived in the same town. Tears streamed down the children's faces. Startled, Gray wondered why they were crying. The boy explained that it was because an adult was being kind to them. The girl added that no one had ever done anything for them and that they only lived with other children. Gray awkwardly tried to calm them down. Inwardly, he felt that he had to save the sick person. Later, the children led him onward. Gray realized they had not introduced themselves yet, so he introduced himself as Gray and mentioned that he was an adventurer. The boy introduced himself as Isoka, and the girl introduced herself as Fio. Gray greeted them and immediately thought about the name Isoka. There was no way it was merely a coincidence. Isoka was the protagonist of this world. If Gray truly had been reborn as a villain, then following the story would eventually lead to his own death. That was why he had resolved not to become involved with the main character. However, he did not know what was actually happening, so he decided to follow his heart and act as he saw fit. Even if becoming involved with Isoka meant death awaited him, there was no way he could simply walk away without helping. He had no desire to walk toward death, but he refused to live with regrets over what he could have done. Eventually, Isoka indicated that they had arrived and went inside the small house after deciding to explain everything to the others. Gray acknowledged him and waited outside. As Gray looked around, he recognized that they were on the outskirts of the slums. Fio tried to speak, prompting Gray to wonder what she wanted. He thought that there was no need for her to wait outside. Fio bowed to thank him, but Gray felt she should only thank him after he had saved her friend. He could not prove that he was not some villain. For all she knew, he could simply be planning to sell her and the rest of their little family into slavery. Even so, Fio believed that, even if that were true, he had at least listened to them. She also did not think he would have spoken that way if he were truly a bad person. Gray thought she was far too naive. She had no real basis for trusting him, though he was glad that she did. When Fio worried that she had upset him, Gray was taken aback. He realized she had mistaken his silence for anger. He was not angry at all and had merely been thinking. Fio smiled in relief. Gray felt awkward and wondered if he really looked that frightening. He already knew the answer. Ever since he had been reborn as Gray, he had heard it repeatedly, and with a face like his, he thought there was no helping it. Before long, Isoka came out of the hut, grateful that Gray had waited. When they entered, Gray saw 2 children inside. One was being carried by a girl, while another child lay on the floor. He recognized that the child lying there was the sick family member they had spoken about. The girl carrying the child asked if Gray was the one who would heal the girl on the floor. Gray intended to do everything he could. The girl apologized for not introducing herself earlier. Her name was Ariamel. She introduced the child in her arms as Mina and the boy beside her as Lutz. She then explained that the girl lying on the floor was Stella and entrusted her to Gray. Gray looked surprised. He asked what color Stella's eyes were. Ariamel answered that they were red and very beautiful. Gray immediately understood. Stella had fangs, pale skin, and red eyes. He wondered if she was a vampire and concluded that she was probably of mixed parentage, meaning both humans and pure vampires would discriminate against her. He also wondered whether Isoka and the others even knew that Stella was part vampire. If they had known, he doubted they would have sought help from a complete stranger. Isoka asked what Gray thought Stella's illness was. Gray realized that Stella was not ill at all. She was suffering from malnutrition. Isoka was shocked by the diagnosis. The children lowered their heads gloomily. Gray knew that if vampires remained malnourished for too long, they would eventually be consumed by an insatiable bloodlust. Yet Stella had never attacked the other children. He wondered if she did not even realize that the urge to drink blood was the true cause of her suffering. Regardless, that made the solution straightforward. He only needed to resolve her malnutrition. Gray asked Isoka what they usually ate. Isoka explained that they received food from the church and, if they managed to sell flowers, they could afford to buy bread. Seeing the gloomy expression on Isoka's face, Gray felt apologetic and understood their situation. He knew the church only distributed food once a week, and that was probably the most lavish meal the children ever had. He decided that he would provide food for all of them for the next month. The children were astonished. Theo felt they could not accept such generosity, but Gray wondered if they truly wanted to save Stella. Their eyes turned toward Stella. Gray understood that his healing magic would not cure her. The only way to recover from malnutrition was to eat balanced meals every day. The children expressed their gratitude to Gray. Gray then headed outside and made his way toward the market. He knew he would regret it if he abandoned the children. A grin crossed his face as he thought that they had truly run out of luck by relying on someone like him. There would be sacrifices if it meant he could feel better about himself. Since their stomachs probably could not handle anything too heavy right away, he decided to buy bread, porridge, and fruit for today. Suddenly, Gray noticed movement behind him. Turning around, he found a group of men following him. The others wore smug grins while their leader tapped him on the shoulder, assuming Gray had his sights set on both the children and their shack. Irritated, Gray wondered who the man thought he was. He grabbed the man's wrist and forced him to remove his filthy hand. A sharp snap rang out as the man's wrist broke. Gray seized him by the head and slammed him into the ground. The man struggled to get back up, but Gray had already decided that, whatever they had been planning to do to those innocent children, he would make sure they never considered it again. Cracking his knuckles, he quickly beat the entire group until every one of them lay unconscious on the ground. Gray picked up one of the men and warned him to listen carefully. If they ever laid a finger on those children, he would turn them into food for the harpies. The man let out a terrified scream. Gray continued by explaining that harpies started eating from their prey's fingers and toes, making sure the victim stayed alive while they slowly chewed. The man trembled in fear. Gray briefly wondered if the man was really that frightened of his face, since he did not think they looked all that different. He slammed the man back onto the ground before picking him up once more. This time, he demanded to know why they had approached him. The man admitted that they had assumed Gray was one of them and wanted to negotiate over the children. Gray smashed the man's face into the ground again, inwardly wondering whether no one had taught them not to judge people by their appearance in grade school. As he walked away, he realized that this world did not even have grade school. While walking through the market, Gray reflected that he had settled in the city of Bastork. It was the capital of the kingdom and the center of the highways connecting neighboring kingdoms, making it a large city with a substantial population. It was home to a massive adventurers guild that offered many moderately difficult quests with respectable rewards. As a versatile adventurer, he could make a comfortable living there because of the city's size. At the same time, a city that large naturally attracted thugs and shady criminal guilds. Gray picked up an apple and bought it along with milk and bread. Since he did not belong to an adventuring party, he never had to split his rewards with anyone. Supporting the children was therefore an easy expense for him. Besides, he doubted anyone would ever want to team up with him anyway. When Gray returned to the shack, he announced that it was time to cook. Isoka was surprised to hear that Gray intended to do the cooking. Gray assumed it did not suit his appearance, but Isoka quickly made it clear that was not what he had meant. Ariamel asked to help and offered to start the fire, while the other children eagerly volunteered as well. Gray thought they were all remarkably well behaved and seemed completely out of place in the slums. Even so, he decided not to pry into their circumstances. Isoka and Fio began slicing the ingredient. As Gray worked in the kitchen, he thought that the children were capable enough to prepare simple dishes themselves. While cooking, he suddenly felt someone tugging on his shirt. Looking down, he found Nina. He wiped the snot from her nose and intended to tell her that he would bring her food soon and that she should wait over there. Instead, Nina simply stared at him. Gray was glad that she was not afraid of him. Then, without warning, she called him Daddy. Gray was caught completely off guard. He knew he was not her father, but he also wondered whether denying it would make her sad. Ariamel came over, gently told Nina to leave Mr. Gray alone, and quickly carried her away. Gray could only wonder what he should do. Later, everyone gathered around the table after the meal was finished. Ariamel invited everyone to eat, and Gray ended up sharing the meal with them. Isoka happily enjoyed the food, while Fio noticed that he was talking with his mouth full and had food on his face. Isoka immediately corrected himself. Lutz and Nina also ate happily. Gray wiped their faces clean. Lutz responded with a mischievous grin, while Nina thanked him and once again called him Daddy. Gray's expression twitched. Isoka looked at Nina and Lutz, pleased that they had enjoyed themselves. Afterward, Ariamel brought food to Stella and helped her try eating. Stella slowly took a spoonful while Ariamel encouraged her to eat at her own pace. Gray observed that Stella seemed to have enough strength to eat. Ariamel then assured Gray that they could at least handle the cleanup themselves, so he could relax and leave the rest to them. Gray agreed. Isoka thanked Gray for the meal, and Fio added that it had been delicious before thanking him as well. Gray accepted their gratitude. Inwardly, he thought they would keep thanking him like this unless they gradually became more comfortable around him. He believed it would work itself out over time. Gray told the children that he was going to head out. Suddenly, Nina squirmed over to him, hugged him tightly, called him Daddy, and handed him a doll. Ariamel apologized before trying to pull Nina away, reminding her that Gray needed to return home. Nina insisted that her daddy's home was there. Gray realized it was still too early for him to sleep, so he decided to stay until then. Nina happily tightened her embrace. Ariamel apologized again, but Gray thought that was simply how toddlers behave. As he reflected on his decision, Gray did not want to regret failing to do what he could. Memories from his previous life surfaced. He remembered his sister remarking that something was off about him. He remembered his mother reminding him to lock the doors and windows whenever he was home alone. He also remembered his father asking him something while heading out of the house, assuming Gray was already in junior high school. They had all told him they would see him later. After those final words, he had been transported. The next morning, Gray walked back toward the shack carrying the freshest ingredients he could find. He was still preparing meals that were easy to digest, intending to surprise the children with premium meat once the time was right. When he arrived, the children thanked him. Gray told them to look at the paper he had brought. Curious, they examined it and discovered that it contained recipes and a menu illustrated with drawings. Gray had prepared it because he could not visit every day, so they could use it as a reference. Ariamel mentioned that the other three were still asleep and asked if Gray wanted to see them. Gray found himself thinking that it felt as though he were a father leaving for work. He went to the room and saw the three children sleeping peacefully. As he looked at them, Ariamel asked whether he had slept well the previous night, considering Nina had thrown a tantrum. Gray assured her that he had no problems and that she should not worry. Relieved, Ariamel relaxed. Isoka then wondered whether they would see Gray again. Gray had every intention of returning. He already had plans. Grinning, he decided it was time to earn some money. A short while later, an elder orc was fleeing as fast as it could. It knew it could not win. All it could do was run. The monster could not understand what was wrong with that man. Humans were supposed to be livestock to elder orcs, creatures that existed only to be trampled beneath their feet. Yet a single man had slaughtered its subordinates, sending their heads flying with ease. The elder orc finally stopped to catch its breath and gather its thoughts. Before it could react, Gray appeared and swung his weapon. The elder orc managed to dodge, only to realize that Gray had been aiming for its crotch. Gray wondered whether the elder orc was finally done playing tag. Since he had things he wanted to buy, he intended to collect the elder orc's head and its balls. At the beginning of Chapter 2, Gray stood before the commission board inside the Bastic Adventurers Guild. His eyes settled on a quest to exterminate an elder orc, and he decided to accept it. Behind him, he heard adventurers whispering. Some wondered whether he was the man from the rumors, while others repeated stories accusing him of extortion, assault, blackmail, robbery, stealing prey, and every other crime they could imagine. Gray dismissed the gossip. If any of it had been true, his adventurer's license would have been revoked long ago. As far as he was concerned, beating up thugs did not count. A familiar voice called out to him. Gray turned to find Gunzus, who commented on the extermination quest and assumed Gray only intended to gather materials and turn them in. Gray asked if Gunzus could refrain from bothering him so early in the morning because it was annoying. Gunzus was the leader of the Blood Axe Party. He mentioned hearing rumors that Gray had been threatening some children from the slums and implied that Gray was planning something. He added that it irritated him that a barbaric criminal like Gray held the same B rank as he did. Gray inwardly compared Gunzus to a clingy child. Ever since Gray had refused the invitation to join the Blood Axe Party, Gunzus had made a habit of bothering him whenever they met. Gray remarked that Gunzus certainly had become full of himself after finally reaching B rank, even though it had taken him 3 years longer than Gray. He wondered if Gunzus was proud of himself. As Gunzus grew visibly angry, Gray continued by saying he understood the feeling because he had been thrilled when he reached E+, just like Gunzus was now. It was always good to remember one's roots. He then suggested that the goblin extermination quest was over there and that Gunzus should go accept it instead. Gunzus flew into a rage and threatened to kill Gray. His own party members quickly stopped him, reminding him that fighting inside the guild was forbidden. The surrounding adventurers watched the confrontation, with some even betting on Gray. Gray reflected that if Gunzus had actually drawn his weapon, he would have had legitimate grounds to claim self-defense. Gray then approached Sasha and informed her that he was accepting a quest. Sasha, the guild receptionist, remarked that he could at least wait until she had officially registered the quest before dealing with Gunzus. Gray pointed out that Gunzus had started the confrontation on his own, so none of it was his fault. Sasha replied that they were not children before deciding to let the matter go. She examined the request. It was an elder orc extermination quest from a village outside Bastik. For the safety of the village, someone needed to kill the monster. Sasha explained that despite the danger, the reward was no higher than that of a normal orc extermination. She had already explained the situation to the village's messenger, but the village was simply too poor to offer more. Quests whose rewards did not match their difficulty were not particularly unusual. Sasha then asked whether Gray intended to temporarily join a party for the mission. Gray declined. Even if he wanted to, no party would accept him. As he considered the job, he estimated that traveling to the village by wagon would take about a day. He needed to finish the quest as quickly as possible so he could return and buy food for Isoka and the others. Before he left, Sasha called out to him once more. When Gray turned back, she thanked him. She admitted that not a single member of the guild staff believed the rumors surrounding him, and they would all be praying for his safe return. Gray wondered why Sasha had thanked him so suddenly. It was not as though he was acting out of pure kindness. Besides the quest reward, there was another benefit to be gained. He grinned as he thought about the Elder Orc's family jewels. They were an ingredient used to produce a powerful aphrodisiac and could be sold for a high price because nobles were always seeking them. Inwardly, he offered his gratitude to the unknown Elder Orc, whose symbol of manhood would now serve the purpose of producing noble heirs. Watching Gray walk away, Sasha wondered what he could possibly be thinking. Gray eventually arrived at the client's village. The village chief thanked him for accepting the request and expressed how grateful they were to have him. The chief then instructed Marina to step forward. She welcomed Gray, who asked to be directed to the Elder Orc so he could begin the extermination immediately. The village chief pointed out that sunset was approaching and suggested that Gray rest for the night instead, explaining that a room had already been prepared for him. Since they insisted, Gray accepted. Meanwhile, Marina was filled with fear. She believed she might be expected to spend the night with Gray. Earlier, the villagers had approached her with a request. As the prettiest young woman in the village, they had asked her to keep the adventurer company for one night. They assured her that, if she bore the adventurer's child, everyone in the village would help raise it. Marina remembered that the villagers had taken her in after she lost her parents. Feeling indebted to them, she believed she had no choice but to agree. Later that evening, Marina knocked on Gray's door. He looked at her trembling figure and asked if she was Marina. She flinched before confirming it. Still trembling, she explained that she would be taking care of him that night, her voice barely above a whimper. Gray pressed a hand to his temple. He wondered whether they were serious and realized this must be the village's way of making up for the meager quest reward. While there were certainly many rough and barbaric adventurers, not all of them made decisions based solely on their desires like Gunzus. Gray explained that there was no need for any of that. Marina did not understand what he meant, so he clarified that it was completely unnecessary. Since he intended to leave early the next morning, he was simply going to sleep. He asked her to inform the villagers and then return home. Although Marina tried to insist, Gray assured her not to worry because he would complete the quest. Once it was over, she would be able to gather in the forest again, and the villagers could return to their normal lives. Marina accepted his decision, apologized for disturbing him, and wished him a good night's rest before leaving. After hearing the door close, Gray remained in his room. As Marina walked away, she thought that Gray was a genuinely kind person. When she returned to the villagers, they immediately asked what had happened. Marina explained that Gray had refused her offer and told them not to worry because he would complete the quest. The villagers were surprised, then deeply relieved that Marina was safe. They embraced her together. The next morning, Marina prepared breakfast and hoped the meal would suit Gray's taste. She brought it to his room and knocked on the door, announcing that she had brought breakfast. Gray replied from inside that he would be there shortly. After opening the door, he greeted Marina. She apologized once again for the previous night, but Gray told her there was no need to apologize and thanked her for bringing breakfast. He finished everything in the basket, praised the meal as delicious, and thanked her for preparing it. Marina blushed and accepted his gratitude. As Gray left the village, the villagers urged him to be careful, reminding him that he was the only one they could rely on. Marina also entrusted the quest to him. Gray waved to them before departing. That brought everything back to the present. The elder orc fled in panic while Gray pursued it, demanding that it hand over what he wanted. The monster thought only of escaping. Gray caught up and severed its right arm. The elder orc screamed in agony. Gray told it to say its final prayers. Grinning wickedly, he wondered whether to take its balls or its head first. Moments later, he sliced off the elder orc's head and cut apart its body. Gray then held out a magic bag. In this world, magic bags were extremely convenient but considered high-class items that few people could afford. He had purchased one back when he belonged to a party. Thanks to it, he did not have to carry the elder orc's head and family jewels by hand. Even so, he still disliked having a head and a pair of balls inside his bag. Gray returned to the village and informed the villagers that he had defeated the elder orc, making it safe for them to enter the forest again. The villagers thanked him for taking the time to report back. As proof, Gray suddenly produced the elder orc's head. The villagers shrieked at the sight but still managed to thank him. After confirming that the monster had indeed been slain, they asked Gray to put the head away. He complied. Marina then approached Gray and wondered whether he would stay another night, offering to prepare another meal for him. Gray thanked her for the offer but apologized because he needed to return as soon as possible. Marina lowered her gaze in understanding. As Gray departed, she thanked him once more and wished him a safe journey home. Gray boarded a wagon for the trip back. Feeling rather pleased with himself, he thought that increasing his savings was going smoothly. Soon he would be able to put his plan into motion and build his dream home. He had been living in Bastik for quite some time, and although staying at an inn was not unpleasant, it was about time he settled down. His thoughts drifted back to the elder orc's family jewels, which would soon help produce noble descendants. Unaware that he had developed a sinister grin while thinking about it, he frightened the other passengers in the wagon. The following morning, Gray returned to the inn in Bastik. After arriving home, he immediately began sewing the doll. He was certain Nina would want it repaired, but the fabric itself had become too worn. Even if he stitched it back together, it would soon tear again. He concluded that it might still be salvageable through alchemy. Gray headed outside. The innkeeper noticed him and pointed out that he had only just returned, yet he was already leaving again. Before Gray could answer, the innkeeper assumed he understood and concluded that it must be because of a woman. He was about to launch into one of his own stories when Gray frowned and called out to Lena, remarking that her father was at it again. The innkeeper immediately panicked as hurried footsteps approached. Lena, the innkeeper's daughter, arrived in frustration. She angrily pounded the counter, clearly exasperated that she had to keep reminding her father not to bother customers with his stories. The innkeeper desperately tried to avoid being struck by her broom while complaining that Gray was unfair for calling Lena over. He believed that, as fellow men, they should be sharing stories of their exploit. Lena insisted that her father stop it. Gray admitted that he had no idea what the innkeeper was talking about. He then announced that he was leaving. Lena assured him that she would handle everything and wished him a good day, while the innkeeper also told him to take care. As he walked away, Gray reflected that the inn had clean rooms, delicious food, and polite service whenever guests arrived or departed. He concluded that the old innkeeper had to be the reason the business was not more prosperous. Gray then visited the alchemist's workshop and called out for luck. The alchemist greeted him and wondered why he was carrying a doll around, remarking that it did not suit him. Gray dismissed the comment and explained that he wanted the doll repaired, asking whether Lux could do it. Lux replied that he certainly could, provided Gray paid for the work. When Gray asked the price, Lux admitted there was actually a component he wanted instead. Before he could finish explaining that it came from an elder orc, Gray produced the elder orc's head. Lux immediately shrieked, telling Gray to put the head away and asking why he was carrying something like that around. What Lux actually wanted was the elder orc's family jewels. Gray wondered how Lux had known. Remembering that Lux had once given him a favor, Gray decided he could oblige. Lux was the sort of person who would even hand over an expensive cure potion for free if someone treated him kindly. Besides, if it would make that child happy, Gray did not mind. Later, Gray arrived at the rickety shack in the slums, where Nina came running toward him in tears. Ariamel apologized, explaining that little Nina had cried for Gray the entire time he had been away. Gray chuckled. Nina reached out, wanting to be carried, and Gray picked her up. His attention then shifted to Stella. Stella observed that he was good at patting Nina gently. Gray accepted the remark. Inwardly, he was relieved that Stella was doing well now. He also noticed that Stella called him Daddy. Gray reached into his pocket and apologized to Nina for making her wait. He handed her the repaired doll. Nina's face lit up with delight. Hugging it tightly, she called it Anya and happily remarked that Anya had become so pretty. The other children watched the scene with warm smiles. Ariamel admitted that she did not know how to thank Gray for everything he had done for them. Gray brushed it off as nothing special. Lutz pulled an apple from Gray's bag. Seeing that, Gray suggested they prepare something to eat. Ariamel agreed, and they headed to the kitchen. She asked Nina to stay with Theo for a while because Nina was clinging to Gray's leg. Gray said it was fine to leave her as she was. Ariamel accepted that, and Nina happily continued hugging Gray's leg with a bright smile. Gray found himself quietly pleased. Later, everyone gathered around the table. As they ate, Gray noticed Isoka quietly passing his mushrooms to Theo without asking. Theo immediately complained about it. From everything Gray had seen so far, Isoka appeared to be nothing more than an ordinary boy. Gray could not imagine how someone like him would one day become the protagonist who saved the world. The thought lingered in his mind. He intended to lend Isoka his strength, but if possible, he wanted all of the children to continue living peaceful lives. Gray then told the children that there was something he wanted to discuss. They all stopped eating and looked at him. Feeling unexpectedly embarrassed, he looked away slightly as he explained that he was planning to buy a house in town. He asked whether they would like to live there with him. The children were stunned. Silence filled the shack. Gray added that it was only if they were comfortable with the idea. Isoka quickly denied any objection, explaining that they had simply been surprised. Theo sought confirmation that Gray truly meant everyone, not just Nina and Ariamel but herself, Isoka, and all the others. Ariamel also asked whether he really intended to take in all of them. Gray confirmed that he did. Nina grabbed Gray's hand and expressed that she wanted to stay with her daddy forever. Lutz smiled at Gray. Ariamel found herself unable to respond immediately before finally resolving that she would do her best. Gray wondered what exactly she meant by that. The idea itself had not been part of any plan, but there was no way he could simply leave the children behind after a month. He let out a quiet sigh, relieved that his proposal had not upset them. Ariamel wondered why they would be upset. She thought about all the food Gray had provided and the way he had repaired Nina's doll. They were all sincerely grateful for everything he had done. Gray looked around to make sure everyone accepted the idea. Isoka and Theo both nodded. Ariamel then looked to Stella for her answer. Stella simply responded with a thumbs up. Gray could not tell what was going through Stella's mind. At the beginning of Chapter 3, Gray stepped outside. Nina wondered whether her daddy was going somewhere. Gray explained that he was going to find them a new home and that she should look forward to it. Nina happily accepted that. Gray thanked her. Ariamel and Stella praised Nina for being a good girl. Theo told Gray that they would see him later, while Isoka wished him a safe trip. Gray replied that he would see them again soon. As he walked away, Gray thought about the house he wanted to buy. He wanted Isoka and the others to each have their own rooms, along with a living room large enough for everyone. The house would have to be much bigger than he had originally planned. A large house suitable for a party of adventurers would be ideal, if he could find one. On the way to the Adventurers Guild, Gray muttered to himself that a bath would be nice as well. He also began wondering what he should prepare for dinner. Suddenly, Gunzus appeared and asked whether Gray had managed to buy an elder orc's ear. Gray sighed inwardly at having to deal with Gunzus again. Gunzus insisted that Gray could not seriously claim to have defeated an elder orc after only 2 days, calling it practically impossible. He assumed Gray must have bought the proof somewhere and demanded to know where, saying it sounded convenient enough that he wanted to buy such items himself. Annoyed, Gray remarked that he understood Gunzus wanted his attention during Gray's free time, but wondered whether Gunzus ought to be taking a quest instead. If he was too afraid to hunt goblins, perhaps he could gather herbs instead. Gunzus brushed the comment aside and demanded an answer about the elder orc's ears. Gray wondered whether Gunzus was actually serious. There was already a system that rewarded adventurers for slaying monsters even when no specific quest existed. All they had to do was bring back a designated item as proof. For orcs, that proof was their ears. Gunzus was pestering him because he wanted those ears to use as evidence. On an extermination quest, however, any suitable proof would suffice. Gray explained that he had not brought the ears, though they were still attached, so there was nothing to worry about. He then tossed something toward Gunzus, who caught it instinctively. When Gunzus looked down, he found himself holding the severed head of the elder orc. Startled, he immediately dropped it onto the floor. Gray picked it up, telling Gunzus not to drop it. Since he had expected Gunzus to make a fuss, he had gone to the trouble of bringing the entire head. Holding Gunzus by the head with one hand and the elder orc's head with the other, Gray wore a broad grin as he silently compared the two. He took satisfaction in reminding Gunzus that he had never defeated an elder orc and was still a complete novice. Gunzus could only plead for him to stop. At that moment, Sasha called out to Gray and instructed him to report the completion of his quest immediately. Gray released Gunzus and placed the elder orc's head on the reception counter. Sasha immediately scolded him, explaining that suddenly putting a monster's head on the counter could be considered harassment. Gray pointed out that it was simply the proof required to complete the quest. Sasha replied that such proof should not be handed directly to the receptionists because a new employee might faint at the sight. Gray assured her not to worry because he only ever used Sasha's reception line. Sasha was unsure how she was supposed to respond to that. She was one of the few receptionists who had never been intimidated by Gray's face, so even when the guild was crowded, he always waited specifically for her. Sasha did not seem particularly pleased by that habit. After letting out a sigh, Sasha handed Gray the reward for completing the quest. Gray then mentioned that there was something he wanted to ask. Sasha remarked that such a request was unusual and asked him to keep it brief. Once he explained what he wanted, Sasha understood that providing that kind of guidance also fell under the guild's responsibilities. She decided they should continue the conversation inside and asked another receptionist, Melinda, to take over her desk. Melinda let out a yawn before suddenly noticing the elder orc's head resting on the reception counter. She hurriedly called after the departing Sasha, asking what she was supposed to do with it. Although she continued calling for Sasha, Sasha ignored her. Gray wondered whether that was really acceptable. Sasha replied that it was fine because, unless Melinda was called by name, she spent most of her time slacking off anyway. Setting that aside, she asked whether Gray's request was for real estate guidance and wondered if something had happened. Later, Sasha announced that they had arrived. She believed the property before them met all of Gray's requirements. Gray was surprised by what stood in front of him. Sasha explained that it had once been the house used by the Valkyrie party. After their party had grown larger, they had moved into a different building, leaving this house vacant. Gray understood immediately. Valkyrie was an all-female A-rank adventuring party said to be the closest in Bastic to achieving S-rank. Parties of S-rank adventurers were even invited to gatherings hosted by nobles and royalty. The women of Valkyrie were so beautiful that young noblemen were undoubtedly eager to meet them. Gray himself had once visited the party on business. Although he had some reservations, the size of the house, the number of rooms, and its location were all ideal. He had no objections. He could already picture Nina excitedly running through the house, while Lutz and Stella stared around with wide eyes. Sasha remarked that Gray had reached his decision surprisingly quickly. Gray replied that the price was inexpensive, noting that it seemed to be only half the cost of similar properties. Sasha explained that the women of Valkyrie had officially requested that, if the buyer was Gray, they would personally cover half of the purchase price. Gray was genuinely surprised. Later, Gray escorted Sasha back to the guild. As they approached, they could hear Melinda inside desperately asking someone to do something about the monster's head. Sasha thanked Gray for accompanying her. As Gray walked back toward the house, he reflected that he had unexpectedly made an excellent purchase. Suddenly, he sensed something. Two presences hid in the shadows ahead, another two waited on the rooftops, and one stood behind him. They could only be there to kill him. Without turning around, Gray remarked that anyone attempting an ambush should at least conceal their bloodlust. The hooded man behind him asked whether he was Gray. Gray noticed the same spiderweb mark that the thugs from the other day had borne. They had warned him that he would not escape and that the rapacious spiders would come after him. The hooded man declared that he had come for Gray's life. Gray asked whether he belonged to the rapacious spiders. Inwardly, he thought the man was remarkably easy to read. Before the hooded man could claim that Gray was about to die and had no need to know, Gray instantly moved behind him and demanded an answer. The man had no chance to react before Gray seized him by the throat. Gray declared that, if they were not members of the rapacious spiders, he would simply kill them. If they were members of the rapacious spiders, he would make sure they died painfully. The man should answer quickly. The hooded man remained silent. Gray muttered that this was becoming troublesome. He still had to prepare dinner for the children and did not have time to waste. With that, he severed the hooded man's head. Gray then cast shackle magic on the second assassin. The man panicked when he realized he could no longer move and wondered what Gray had done. Gray calmly concluded that it was obviously magic. He had already restrained the two assassins on the rooftops as well. Before the man could say anything further, Gray killed him. Meanwhile, at the rickety shack in the slums, one thug suggested attacking the children while Gray was away. His companion dismissed the idea as foolish. Gray was abnormally strong, and they should wait until the others had finished him off. At that moment, Gray appeared behind them. He pointed out that they had ignored his warning. The men were shocked and immediately told the others to retreat. Gray remarked that they had a lot of nerve snooping around the children. He had failed to obtain any useful information from the previous group, so if these men wanted a painless death, They should tell him where the rest of their comrades were. They should never have gone near the children. Later, Gray returned to the shack, where Ariamel and Nina warmly welcomed him. Gray confirmed that he was home. Inwardly, he reflected that he had already discovered the location of the remaining members of the rapacious spiders. He intended to finish them off after the children had gone to bed. Nina called for her daddy and asked to be picked up. Gray felt a little awkward. He cleared his throat, but when Nina called him again, he crouched down and lifted the squealing little girl into his arms. Nearby, Isoka asked Ariamel whether there was anything he could help with before noticing Gray. Stella then walked over and decided it was unfair that only Nina was being carried. She wanted to be picked up as well. Lutz silently approached and tugged at Gray's clothes. Gray told him to wait for his turn, and Lutz obediently nodded. Gray then announced that he had bought their new house that day. Once everything was settled in 2 days, they would all move in together. The children excitedly welcomed the news. Later that night, everyone went to sleep. Gray quietly stood up and put on his jacket. Just then, Stella asked whether her daddy was going to work. Gray apologized for waking her. He explained that he was only going out for a little while and that she should go back to sleep. Stella wondered whether he would come back. Gray assured her that he would because they were all going to live together from now on. He also told her not to get hurt because he did not want her worrying about him. Stella pointed out that everyone would worry. Gray understood and promised that he would return soon. Stella then called him daddy once more and asked him to tell them someday why he had become their daddy. Gray admitted that it was not something he intended to hide and was ready to explain it immediately. However, Stella insisted that she wanted to hear the story together with everyone else. Satisfied, she said she would see him later. As Gray walked away, he reflected that Stella always seemed able to see right through him. It was not an unpleasant feeling. Thinking about the new life he would share with the children, he headed toward the 2 men he had bound earlier. Inwardly, he reminded himself that a daddy had to work hard. He informed the 2 captives that they would be guiding him to the rapacious spider's hideout. The 2 captured men led Gray to a house. The first pleaded for his life, insisting that he truly regretted attacking the children. He promised to change and live honestly from then on. The second man echoed the same plea. They had already led Gray to the hideout, and neither of them wanted to die. Gray reminded them that he had already given them a warning. They had chosen to throw away that chance themselves. To the people who had suffered because of them, it made no difference whether they claimed they would turn over a new leaf. Allowing them to live would only leave a potential threat to the children's future. Gray killed both men and walked away, thinking that he needed to finish everything quickly. Otherwise, Nina would be lonely, and Stella would worry about him. When Gray reached the hideout, one of the guards demanded to know who he was, remarking that Gray hardly looked like someone who lived an honest life. Gray regarded himself as nothing more than an adventurer and asked whether the man belonged to the rapacious spiders. The guard hurried back inside, wondering how Gray had discovered them. Before he could get away, Gray cut off his head. Another guard met the same fate. Gray deliberately aimed for the head because it was the quickest and most reliable method. It also ensured that none of them would return as undead. He decided not to use magic for now since it would be troublesome if someone inside possessed a magic detection skill. A man inside frantically demanded to know who Gray was and what had happened to the guards outside. Gray casually answered by killing him the same way, severing his head before moving on. Throughout the hideout, screams and desperate pleas for mercy echoed around him. After dealing with everyone in his path, Gray advanced deeper into the building. Looking around, he recognized the place as a typical large underground hideout. It took longer than expected to reach the boss's room. Along the way, a man confidently declared that the hideout had attracted quite the lively intruder. Claiming to be a former B-rank adventurer, he boasted that he would teach Gray to fear his strength. Gray cut him down without hesitation and continued walking, thinking that the man's ability did not even compare to Gunz's. Another opponent charged at him. Gray noted that this one seemed somewhat stronger and wondered what kind of training the organization even provided. Then a bald thug recognized Gray. Gray found the reaction confusing. After looking around at the piles of corpses, the bald thug shrieked and turned to flee. Gray immediately kicked him down. Grabbing the bald thug by the head, Gray remarked that running away was a rather cold thing to do. He demanded to know where the boss's room was. The terrified thug quickly agreed to cooperate and entered the password. As soon as part of the mechanism opened, Gray cut him down as well. He briefly thought that perhaps he should have fed one of them to the harpies instead. What emerged was the boss himself, seated upon a large chair. The boss muttered that Gray had really come alone, just as the reports had said. He then asked what Gray was to those children. Drawing his sword, Gray regarded himself as their father. The boss found that absurd and concluded that Gray had lost his mind. Gray, however, was short on time and wanted to end everything quickly. He decided the boss should apologize in the afterlife to everyone he had harmed. The boss tried to ask what Gray actually knew about the children, but before he could continue, Gray killed him. The next morning, Nina tried to wake the still sleeping Gray because she wanted food. Stella sat beside him and quietly greeted the morning. The two girls repeatedly patted him, while Nina sleepily called him a sleepyhead. Ariamel noticed them and gently explained that Gray was tired and should be allowed to sleep a little longer. Nina squeezed Gray's cheeks while Stella poked him. Gray decided it was probably time to get up. Meanwhile, back at the inn, the innkeeper brought up the rapacious spiders. They had apparently been one of the largest criminal groups in town. Many of their members specialized in combat, frequently clashed with the town guard, and had even given the elite guards considerable trouble. Yet the entire organization had been wiped out in a single night. According to what he had heard, every member in the hideout, including the boss, had been killed, and every one of them had been beheaded. Lena added that when she had gone shopping, the incident had been the only thing anyone was talking about. The innkeeper remarked that one might expect other criminal groups to seize the opportunity to expand, but he doubted they would. They would all be too afraid of making the wrong move and becoming the next target. Gray remained silent. He then realized they were discussing the fact that he had been staying at the inn all this time. The innkeeper was surprised to hear that and casually admitted that he simply enjoyed idle gossip. Lena admitted that she could not even imagine Gray leaving because he had been staying there for so long. Gray agreed. He remembered the first time Lena had seen him. She had been frightened by his face. Lena apologized, explaining that she did not remember it. The innkeeper remarked that Lena had been very young at the time. He then told Gray that, if he ever needed anything, he should come to them. Gray agreed. The next day, Ariamel asked Nina whether she had Anya. Nina happily confirmed that she did. Gray announced that he had originally planned to buy everyone new clothes, but after looking at the children, he decided they should visit the bathhouse first. Theo became excited at the thought of taking a bath. They then went to the public bathhouse. Gray requested 2 private rooms from the receptionist, one for the boys and one for the girls. Before they separated, Theo remarked that they would see Isoka, Lutz, and Gray afterward. Nina tugged on Gray, wanting to go with him. Ariamel gently explained that Gray was a man and that they would only be apart for a little while. Stella suggested that she and Nina go together. Ariamel reassured Nina that, if she listened properly, Gray would surely pick her up and hug her afterward. Satisfied, Nina went with the others. The boys entered the bath. Gray asked Lutz to sit down so he could wash his hair. Lutz obediently sat on the stool. As Gray scrubbed Lutz's hair, he grinned to himself. He had always wanted to experience simple parent and child moments like washing a child's hair. After finishing with Lutz, he told Isoka that it was his turn. Isoka initially refused because he found it embarrassing, but before long he was sitting on the stool as well while Gray thoroughly washed his hair. After everyone had changed into clean clothes, the girls returned. Ariamel apologized for taking so long, and Theo also apologized for making the boys wait after noticing that Lutz had fallen asleep. Gray assured them that it was perfectly fine. Afterward, Gray took the children to a clothing shop. The shopkeeper nervously welcomed them and asked what kind of clothes they were looking for. Gray simply told her to let the children choose whatever they liked. Isoka suggested that Gray help pick some outfits as well, but Gray admitted that he had no sense of fashion. Later, Nina happily ran over wearing a frilly dress that made her look like a princess. Gray was completely captivated by how adorable his daughter looked. Stella helped Lutz try on clothes, while Ariamel, Theo, and Isoka selected outfits of their own. Nina proudly admired herself, convinced that she looked very pretty. Gray wholeheartedly agreed. Later, Gray brought the children to their new house. They were amazed when he revealed that it would be their new home. Stella eagerly ran ahead to explore, taking Nina and Lutz with her. Nina excitedly told her daddy that they were going, while Isoka and Theo hurried after the younger children so they would not be alone. Gray reminded them to be careful as Theo helped Stella and Nina climb the stairs. Gray explained to Ariamel that the individual bedrooms were on the second floor and suggested that they choose on a first-come, first-served basis. Ariamel replied that she would simply take whichever room remained last and encouraged Gray to choose first instead. Gray told her there was no need to hold back because they were family now. Ariamel agreed that they were, but explained that it was not really about holding herself back. Gray thought it would probably take some time before the children felt comfortable making requests of their own. From upstairs, he could already hear Nina's amazed voice echoing through the large rooms. For the time being, the younger children would sleep with either Ariamel or Gray. The room beside Gray's belonged to Isoka, and the next one belonged to Theo. Looking at the children, Gray thought that arrangement would be fine until they eventually wanted rooms of their own. He had secured clothes, food, and a place to live for them. The next thing to consider was school. This world had an academy that children could attend from the age of 12, but Gray questioned how useful it would actually be for their future. It seemed better suited to giving the children of nobles opportunities to build relationship. If any spoiled noble children ever laid a hand on these kids, Gray already knew how he would respond. He wondered whether the children had dreams for the future. He hoped they would tell him someday. Although he had killed the boss before the man could reveal anything, It was not because Gray lacked interest in the children's pasts. Living together would naturally allow him to learn more about them over time. Even family members had secrets, and he had no intention of prying without their consent. Whatever their circumstances might have been, Gray had already decided that he would support them. That night, Ariamel, Fio, and Isoka came to Gray's room. Curious, Gray wondered what was going on. They explained that they had always slept together before, so sleeping alone felt strange. Gray invited them inside. Since there was not enough space on the bed, he spread futons across the floor. After wishing everyone good night, the lights were turned off. Gray lay down surrounded by the children and realized that, in the end, it was not all that different from sleeping together in the shack. He found that perfectly fine. At the beginning of Chapter 4, it was morning and Isoka was still sleeping. Someone shouted at his door. Fio entered and pulled him up, insisting that he get out of bed because everyone had already started eating breakfast. Isoka apologized and got up. It had been close to a month since they started living in their new house. Isoka was not a morning person. Fio was sensible. Nina ate a lot. Stella had a sweet tooth. Nina and Stella were picky eaters. Later, Gray thanked Ariamel for cooking. Ariamel replied that it was only natural and asked him to set the plates on the table. Gray noticed a sheet of paper and realized it was the recipe he had given her. Ariamel explained that it was a copy she had made because she did not want to alter the originals Gray had given them. She still kept the ones that were only pictures. Gray realized that Ariamel could read and write, which was unusual for children in this world. Before leaving, Gray informed Nina and the others that he was heading out. Nina asked him to come back soon, and Ariamel wished him a good day. Outside, Lutz was staring at a cat. Gray told Lutz to greet it for him as well. Lutz responded with a wave, and Fio said she would see Gray later. Lutz did not talk at all, but he often communicated with animals through eye contact. There was still a great deal they did not know about one another, but they were gradually learning. Near Bastoke, Gray slaughtered some goblins. His life had become quite different. In the past, he had only returned to the inn to sleep or prepare for expeditions. Now he only accepted day quests. He thought about finishing off the goblins quickly so he could head home. Later, at the Adventurers Guild, Sasha remarked that Gray had seemed restless lately and had been completely ignoring Gansas. Gray was startled. Sasha asked whether he thought she had not noticed. She handed him his payment. Gray asked whether Ganzo had been pestering him lately. Sasha answered that it happened every day. Gray admitted he had not noticed. Sasha questioned whether he was serious because Gansas was standing right behind him. Gray muttered that it felt like a horror story. He thought that he would rather go home and read to Nina and the others than waste time on Gansas. As he walked through the streets, he saw Donut. He bought 7, and the vendor thanked him. He continued on his way home. He passed a cat while crows cawed from a lamp. He kept walking and remembered how he used to say goodbye to his friends. When he reached home, he greeted the picture frames to announce that he was back. His family was already gone. It was a meaningless ritual, but Gray simply could not let it go. Back in the present, Gray arrived home and informed Nina and Lutz, who were playing in the front yard. Lutz and Nina welcomed him home. Ariamel invited him inside and welcomed him back. While using the kitchen tools, she explained that dinner was not ready yet and asked whether everyone wanted to eat first or take a bath. Gray decided they should eat since everyone was probably hungry by then. Ariamel was surprised when Gray brought something for everyone to share later. She pointed out that Gray had been doing this every day for a week. Stella had been skipping dinner because she wanted sweets, and it was unhealthy, so Ariamel asked Gray to bring treats only once in a while. Gray thought that Ariamel had seemed like an older sister at first, but she was truly like a mother. Later, everyone started eating. Fio turned to Isoka. Isoka agreed that they should tell Gray. Isoka called out to him. Gray asked what it was. Isoka told him that he and Fio wanted to become adventurers. Fio asked whether Gray would teach them swordsmanship and magic. Ariamel was surprised and asked what the two of them were talking about. Fio explained that they wanted to be helpful too. Gray thought that Isoka and Fio probably felt bad about only being on the receiving end. For him, simply having the joy of being a family was enough. He told them that he was not opposed to it if that was truly what they wanted, but they should set the matter aside for now. Ariamel lowered her gaze to her plate. As Gray put the children to bed, he thought that Ariamel's objection probably came from concern for the two of them. Adventuring was a profession where no one ever knew what might happen. That was all the more reason for Gray to help them gain the skills to support themselves in case anything ever happened to him. Although he had no intention of dying, he did not want the children to experience the pain of losing their family a second time. Someone called to him. Stella was apologizing in her sleep and mentioned something that could cause transformation. She continued snoring softly. The next morning, everyone was seated at the dining table. Gray thanked everyone for the meal, and Nina did the same. Ariamel told them they were welcome. Stella kept staring at Gray and he could feel her gaze. Ariamel then remembered something and told Gray that she had prepared a lunchbox for him that day. She explained that he seemed to have been skipping lunch, so she made one for him. If it was a bother or he did not need it, he could simply leave it behind. Gray accepted it, saying that he sometimes thought about eating lunch and would gratefully take it. In his mind, he thought that if anyone rejected something like this, he would like to see their face after lopping off their head. Ariamel brought up the subject of Isoka and Fio. Gray explained that whether they became adventurers or not, he wanted to support them in pursuing their dreams, but he did not understand Ariamel's concern. He wondered why she did not discuss it with them herself. Ariamel admitted that she supposed she should. She smiled, wished Gray a good day, and told him to come home safely. When Gray arrived at the Adventurers Guild, he noticed it was unusually noisy. He asked Sasha whether something was happening that day. Sasha explained that it was the day the women from Valkyrie were returning from their expedition. They had cleared a dungeon called Garden, which no one had managed to conquer before. She reminded him that the announcement flyer had been posted for days before letting out a sigh. Sasha then told Gray to line up with a different receptionist for the day, and he agreed. As he left, she pointed at him and reminded him not to turn in any heads. Nearby, Melinda tearfully begged Sasha. While looking over the quest board, Gray thought about clearing a dungeon. He had not entered one in several years. The dungeons that interested him were all filled with troublesome monsters, making them unsuitable for someone adventuring alone. Among the monsters in this world, there was a small chance that one would be born with a special ability. Most of the time, there was no way to know what ability it possessed until it was encountered in battle. Gray decided to take another nearby goblin extermination quest that day. For example, a goblin could possess complete immunity to magic. Any magical attack would be useless against it, but aside from that, it was still just a goblin. It could be killed by being struck, cut down, or even by falling from a great height. Likewise, even if a monster possessed exceptional skill with a bow, it could still be defeated by a novice adventurer if it insisted on fighting with a club instead. No matter how powerful a monster's ability was, it served no purpose if the monster did not know how to use it. On the other hand, if it was intelligent enough to make use of its ability, it became a real threat. Gray considered that there might have been such a monster among the goblins he had killed the previous day. He recalled one that had seemed unusually fast. That ability might have been something bestowed upon monsters, much like the skills or gifts humans were born with. The church would certainly make a fuss if it heard such a theory. Gray, however, did not think God cared whether one was human or monster. Just as humans had heroes, saintesses, and skill holders, there might be similar beings among monsters. Later, Gray finished his lunch and thought that it had been delicious. Eating it while sitting on the grass had made it taste incredibly good. He wondered whether he should take everyone on a picnic someday. Ariamel was good at cooking, skilled at housework, and beautiful. If she ever went out into the world, she would certainly be popular. Someday, she would probably bring home a boyfriend. Gray decided he would have to practice so he would not end up relieving the boy of his head. Back at the present, Melinda called for the next person in line and was surprised to see Gray. Gray thought that her distaste was remarkably obvious. He reported the completion of his quest. Melinda expressed relief that he had only brought the designated monster parts that time. She admitted that when she first saw his face, she had thought she was doomed. Gray pointed out that it was not as though he always brought in heads. Gray looked around and asked whether the Valkyrie party had returned yet. Melinda confirmed that they had and explained that they were upstairs speaking with Sasha and the guild master. She added that Valkyrie was full of beautiful women and wondered if Gray was interested in them as well. Gray denied it with visible annoyance. Sasha teased him for pretending otherwise. Gray told Melinda not to abbreviate her boss's title. Melinda asked whether he was going to wait since they should be coming downstairs soon. Gray declined and walked away. In his mind, he thought that he wanted to speak with them about the house, but not that day. The Valkyrie party had only just returned from their expedition and would not be setting out again immediately. He remembered that he had planned to bring home a treat, but then realized he would only end up getting scolded. Later, Ariamel welcomed Gray home. Gray told her that the lunch had been delicious. Delighted, Ariamel decided that she would make one for him again the next day. That night, everyone sat together on the couch playing cards. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door. Gray answered it, remarked that it was late, and asked what they needed. His eyes widened when he saw that the two girls standing outside were from Valkyrie. At the beginning of Chapter 5, Emilia, the A+ rank adventurer and leader of Valkyrie, greeted Gray after a long time apart. Beside her stood Kasha, an A-rank adventurer and fellow member of Valkyrie. Emilia explained that Melinda had told them Gray was on the first floor of the guild while they had been upstairs delivering their report. She remarked that it had been rather cold of him to leave instead of staying to greet them. Gray silently thanked Melinda for that. Kasha waved at him and suggested that he invite them inside since they were attracting attention. Just then, Ariamel peeked out from behind Gray and asked whether the two women were acquaintances of his and if she should prepare some tea. Emilia and Kasha were stunned, while Ariamel looked at them in confusion. Wondering about the sudden tension, Gray invited them inside. They entered the house and sat across from one another on the couches. Isoka asked Gray whether the two women were his friends. Gray explained that they had once been in the same party. Isoka and Fio looked on in awe as Ariamel served tea. Emilia, Kasha, and Gray thanked her. Nina and Stella then came over and clung to Gray, each hugging one of his sides while whimpering. Puzzled, Gray looked to Ariamel, who explained that they were worried the two women had come to take him away. Ariamel approached the girls and gently asked them to come with her, explaining that Gray and his friends had important matters to discuss. Instead, Nina and Stella tightened their embrace, insisting that the women were going to take him. Emilia admitted that she now had even more questions and asked who the children were. Gray answered that they were his children. Emilia was left speechless before demanding to know who their mother was. Startled, Nina burst into tears and insisted that Gray was her daddy. Gray could only think that his shirt was about to end up covered in snot. Kasha told Emilia not to frighten the children. When Emilia tried to argue, Kasha reminded her to consider the children's ages. She then asked Ariamel how old she was. Ariamel answered that she was 13. That would mean Gray had already had children while he was adventuring with them. As Kasha began to wonder aloud who Gray had been dating back then, Gray quickly stopped her before she could finish. Kasha giggled and apologized. Kasha admitted that she had been wondering about Stella and asked whether she was a vampire, and if so, whether she was half or quarter vampire. Stella looked at Kasha. Gray reassured Stella that the two women would not bully her. Stella accepted his reassurance. Gray sighed and decided that he would explain everything, from how he had met the children to how they had come to live together. After hearing the story, Emilia remarked that Gray had never changed. Kasha agreed, saying that Gray had always been quick to help those who were weak or in trouble, despite his thuggish appearance and attitude. Gray thought that she had chosen the one thing that bothered him most to bring up. Gray then asked them about the house. He wanted to know how they had known he intended to buy it. Emilia explained that it had not been limited to that house. They had informed the guild that Valkyrie would pay half the cost of any party house Gray purchased in Bastoke. Gray asked why they would do that, although he admitted he was grateful. Closing her eyes, Emilia explained that buying a party house would mean Gray was forming a new party. If that happened, she and Kasha needed to see what kind of people his new companions were. Gray had always been so strongly opposed to joining another party that she wanted to know what kind of people had made him change his mind or whether they were deceiving him. Gray thought that he was not some clueless novice adventurer. Emilia continued that this was why they had come to inspect the house, only to discover 6 children instead. It had certainly been an unexpected surprise. Gray was about to respond, but he noticed that Nina had become sleepy. Ariamel observed the same and suggested that if Nina was tired, she should go to bed. Nina pleaded with Gray not to leave. Gray assured her that he was not going anywhere and told her to go to sleep, promising that he would go to bed as well once everything was finished. The children then went to bed. Looking at Ariamel, Gray remarked that she was a very dependable child. Emilia observed that although Gray called her a child, Ariamel was more like a wife. Gray decided that was enough to think about for one night. Kasha apologized for staying so late. Gray offered to walk the two of them home. Emilia declined, reminding him that they were A-rank adventurers and that no ruffian in town stood a chance against them. Kasha commented that Gray was still the same as ever, and somehow that was reassuring. She mentioned that an entire criminal organization had apparently been wiped out about a month earlier, with all of their heads cut off. Emilia added that public order had improved because of it, making it even less necessary for Gray to worry. Gray admitted that it had indeed happened. Outside, Ariamel caught up with them and asked whether Emilia was leaving. Emilia apologized again for staying so late. Ariamel replied that there was no need to apologize and that any friend of Gray's was welcome anytime. Hearing the word friend spoken aloud caught Emilia by surprise. Ariamel asked whether she had said something wrong. Kasha pulled Emilia away, thanked Ariamel for having them, and said they would head home. Gray told the two women to visit again. As Emilia and Kasha walked away, Gray asked Ariamel what that had been about. Ariamel replied that the two women had come because they cared about how Gray was doing. Gray understood. The next morning, Stella wished Gray a good day, and Nina told him to hurry back as he prepared to leave. Ariamel walked over and reminded him that he had forgotten his lunchbox. Gray thanked her. After he stepped outside, Ariamel told him to take care and have a nice day. Outside, Fio and Isoka were sparring. Gray reminded them not to overdo it. They wished him a good day, and Isoka asked him to teach them magic next time. Gray told him to learn to read first, explaining that swordsmanship and magic would come afterward. In his mind, Gray thought Ariamel could teach the two of them to read. It would also be a good opportunity for the three of them to talk. Having a family see him off like this was a luxury. It was more valuable than any extravagant meal or treasure hoard. He felt capable of doing anything to protect that way of life. This was the power of a father. Upon arriving at the Adventurers Guild, Gray was greeted by Emilia, who apologized for the previous night. Gray told her it was fine and thanked her and the others for worrying about him. Another voice then called out to him. It was Halsaria, another A+ rank adventurer and member of Valkyrie. Halsaria greeted Gray, and he recognized her. Halsaria told Emilia that everyone was saying they should get going. Emilia agreed. Gray asked whether they had already been assigned another job despite only just returning. Emilia explained that they were not taking another quest but were going to meet Lord Bastoke, who wanted to hear about the garden dungeon. Gray understood. Emilia's eyes widened as she asked whether Gray was also interested. Gray admitted that he was because dungeons represented the romance of adventure. Emilia became flustered and started to say that, since it had been a while, they should have, but she failed to finish her sentence. Halsaria dragged Emilia away, reminding her that Kasha would get angry if they were late. Emilia simply waved, said they would see Gray later, and bid him farewell. At the reception counter, Melinda asked whether Gray was on good terms with Valkyrie. Gray asked why she suddenly wanted to know. Melinda explained that Emilia had asked about him the previous day and that they had been talking again just now. Gray answered that they went way back. After asking whether that was all, he started to leave. Melinda confirmed that it was. Gray thought that if he mentioned they had once been in the same party, Melinda would undoubtedly ask for details. The reason the party had disbanded was nothing dramatic, but he did not want to talk about it. Sasha would not come asking about it either. His former party was called One Blade. Emilia had been the swordsman. Kasha had been the healer. Gray had been the magic knight as well as the leader. There had been 2 other members. The 6 of them had formed the party while they were active in another country. They had been a promising mid-level party, steadily advancing in rank, but as their reputation grew, so did their obligations. That was probably why the Lord wanted Valkyrie to build ties with future S-rank adventurers. From a practical standpoint, it benefited both sides, although Gray did not know how Emilia and the others truly felt about it. Gray remained curious about the garden dungeon. He decided that he would invite them over for a meal someday and ask them about it. Isoka and Theo would surely be thrilled. Ariamel, however, would probably have mixed feelings. If Isoka and Theo wanted to become adventurers because of him, Gray was certain he would cry. Gray cut down the last monster. At noon, he finished his lunch and thought that it had been delicious. As he stood up, he pinched his stomach. His eyes widened. He had been taking only easy quests while enjoying delicious meals morning, noon, and night. This was completely the result of living such a comfortable life. He found himself wondering what would be served for dinner. After returning to the Adventurers Guild, Emilia noticed that he was already back. She pointed out that returning so early meant he had taken an easy quest. Gray admitted that he had because he wanted to get home before dark. Emilia asked whether it was for the children. Gray answered that it was also for himself. Gray then asked whether Emilia had returned early because Lord Bastoke had not invited her to dinner. Emilia replied that he had invited her, but she had declined. Gray thought that Emilia had actually turned down account. Emilia explained that the garden dungeon had not even been the main topic of their meeting. According to the Lord, an oracle in another country had chosen a hero. He wanted to assign Valkyrie as members of the hero's party. Gray considered this quietly. Emilia continued that the hero was apparently a man. Since Valkyrie was an all-women party with a high rank, recommending them was entirely natural. It was a perfect match on paper. Gray remarked that it sounded as though Emilia had no intention of accepting. Emilia immediately rejected the idea, saying that it was essentially the same as sending them as potential brides, which she refused to accept. Kasha reminded Emilia that she was speaking rather loudly and should calm down. She apologized to Gray for taking up his time and asked him to pretend he had not heard any of that before telling Emilia they should leave. Emilia apologized to Gray once more and said she would see him later. Gray agreed. As he watched them leave, Gray wondered whether it was truly acceptable for such a high-ranking party to refuse a request from the country. He hoped it would not lead to trouble. He also realized that Isoka was not the hero. Then again, the protagonist did not necessarily have to be the hero. At times like this, having knowledge of the game would have been useful. His thoughts soon drifted back to wondering what would be for dinner. When Gray returned home, everyone greeted him. He felt somewhat relieved that Isoka was not the hero. Ariamel welcomed him back and explained that the 3 younger children had something they wanted to show him. She turned toward Nina, Lutz, and Stella. Each of them was holding a sheet of paper. The 3 children proudly showed Gray their drawings of him. Gray was deeply moved and lowered his head. Ariamel asked whether he was all right. Trembling, Gray wondered what she meant. He insisted to himself that he was perfectly fine. He was a B-rank adventurer. Something like this could not possibly shake him. Seeing his reaction, the younger children wondered whether he was unhappy. Gray broke into tears before hugging all 3 of them. He told them how happy they had made him, thanked them for the drawings, and decided that he would buy picture frames enchanted with water, fire, and impact resistance magic. Stella complained that Gray's hug was too tight. In that moment, Gray vowed to become a wonderful father. Ariamel looked out the window. It seemed that Gray was saying something to Fio and Isoka before leaving. Stella and Nina walked over to her and asked what they were going to do that day. Nina excitedly asked to play. Ariamel smiled at them and told everyone that they would stomp the laundry together. The two younger children became excited. The children ran off, humming that Anya needed nap time. Isoka said they would help as well. Fio agreed and suggested that Isoka could clean the bath. They turned to Ariamel, and Isoka said he wanted to talk about sword practice. Fio added that they had something they wanted to discuss with Ariamel after they finished cleaning. Ariamel agreed. Everyone worked together to clean the house. As Isoka scrubbed the floor, Ariamel reminded the children to be careful not to fall. Suddenly, Isoka slipped and fell. Ariamel immediately asked if he was all right. Nina and the other children also asked after him. Fio wondered why Isoka had fallen, then told him to hold on while she gave him first aid. Later, while they were doing the laundry, Ariamel reminded the three younger children to hold on tightly because they did not want to end up like Isoka. She apologized to Isoka inwardly and laughed. Isoka smiled. After they finished the laundry and hung the clothes out to dry, Ariamel thanked the children for helping. Everything was clean. They had done it together. Nina asked Ariamel to tell her daddy that she had helped a lot. Ariamel agreed, saying they all deserved plenty of praise. She remarked that they must be tired and suggested having something to eat. At the table, Stella thought the food was delicious. Ariamel encouraged her to finish all of it, and Stella obediently did so. Isoka thanked Ariamel for the meal and said he would clean up afterward. Ariamel thanked him. Fio said she would go shopping. Ariamel asked her to buy some coffee for Gray as well. Looking out the window, Ariamel saw Lutz bringing food to the cat, Nora. Lutz and Nina happily watched the cat eat. Stella tugged on Ariamel to let her know she needed to use the toilet. Ariamel told everyone that they should all go before it was time for their nap. Later, the three younger children were sound asleep as Ariamel watched over them. Isoka called to her. Ariamel asked Isoka and Fio what was wrong. Fio told her that they truly wanted to become adventurers. Ariamel explained that instead of doing something as dangerous as becoming adventurers, she would rather they find jobs in town, such as working at the market or at the Adventurers Guild. Isoka replied that they wanted to become strong enough to help people the way Gray did. Fio added that they would study swordsmanship and magic diligently so Ariamel would not have to worry. Isoka then said that before any of that, he wanted Ariamel to teach them how to read and write. At that moment, Ariamel understood. Gray had reached out a hand to them, allowing the two of them to think about their futures. She agreed and said she thought it was a good idea. Fio thanked her. Just then, Lutz tugged at Ariamel's hand. Ariamel explained that what she was holding was paper and charcoal sticks for writing and wondered whether Lutz was interested. Stella woke from a dream in which her papa had lost his hair again. Nina tugged on Lutz and asked what he was doing. Lutz had begun drawing on the paper. Ariamel suggested that Nina, Lutz, and Stella write a letter to their father. She told them that she would teach them the letters and that they should write Papa and Daddy. She was certain their father would be overjoyed. Nina eagerly grabbed a charcoal stick to write for her daddy. Stella took a sheet of paper as well. Isoka said that he would write one too. Seeing that both Fio and Isoka intended to do the same, Ariamel remarked that Gray would be very happy. Isoka quietly admitted that he could not show his letter to Gray. At the beginning of Chapter 6, Gray woke up in the middle of the night and carefully sat up. He had only one thing to do that day. He was going to buy some picture frames. Ariamel asked whether she had woken him. She explained that she was just getting ready to make breakfast and that he could go back to sleep. Gray declined, saying that he always left everything to her and asking her to let him help once in a while. Ariamel smiled and agreed. The two of them went straight to the kitchen. Ariamel arranged the table while Gray cooked. After setting everything out, Gray wondered whether he had made too much food. He decided it was fine since all the children were still growing. Fio hurried into the kitchen, apologizing to Ariamel for oversleeping. Ariamel greeted her good morning. Fio was surprised to see Gray already there. Gray remarked that her timing was perfect and asked her to wake everyone else. Ariamel noticed that Fio had bed hair and wondered whether she had stayed up late. Covering her hair in embarrassment, Fio went to wake the others, starting with Isoka. Soon afterward, the sounds of lively chatter filled the house. The three younger children wandered into the kitchen, still half asleep. Ariamel greeted them good morning and pointed out that they had gotten up all by themselves. Stella admitted that she was still sleepy. Gray was left speechless. He decided to take the three children to get washed while Ariamel finished preparing everything. Gray picked up the children and headed to what he considered the battlefield, the bath. Nina immediately refused when she saw the water. Stella drank from the wash basin. Lutz then let his head fall into the basin, prompting Gray to quickly pull him back up. By the end of it, Gray was completely soaked along with the children. Ariamel giggled, apologized, and remarked that the children must have been quite a handful. Gray then remembered something and asked Ariamel not to prepare a lunch for him that day. Ariamel asked why. Gray explained that he was not taking a quest because they were all going out to eat instead. The three younger children instantly became excited and asked whether their father was taking the day off. Gray confirmed that he was. Stella asked whether she could come too. Gray patted her head and assured her that it was a family outing. Gray understood why Stella had been worried. She probably believed that everyone looked at them strangely because of her. If they encountered anyone like that, he would cut them off. No, he would simply deal with them. Gray then remembered something. The other day, while he had been talking with Halsaria, a guard had approached them. Halsaria had wondered whether the man was a city guardsman. The guard pointed at Gray and explained that a report had been received about someone who looked like the type to sell an elf speaking with an elf. Gray had wondered what the guard meant by someone who looked like they would sell an elf. Remembering that incident, Gray concluded that Stella did not need to worry. He was the reason people looked at them strangely. The prejudice against his appearance outweighed any prejudice directed at a mixed-blood vampire. Even so, he still ended up being reported. While they were out with the children, a guard remarked that even if Gray was not a kidnapper, he still wanted to know whose children they were because their parents must surely be worried. Gray answered that he was their parent. The guard was left speechless. Another guard then remarked that Gray should think before he spoke. He questioned whether the children were siblings since they did not resemble one another. Gray reasoned that there were plenty of blood-related families whose members did not look alike. The guard's gaze then settled on the purple-haired Stella. Gray glared furiously and demanded to know what the problem was with Stella. The guard flinched before explaining that regardless of Gray's attitude, their duty was to keep the peace and protect the citizens. If Gray had a complaint, he should take it to the guard station. Ariamel interrupted the exchange and fixed the guards with an angry glare. She firmly stated that everything Gray had said was true and that the children were his family. She pointed out that, by the guard's own standards, children dressed in ordinary clothing were citizens, and therefore it was none of their concern. The guards were taken aback. Suddenly, Nina hugged Gray's leg and pleaded with the guards not to bully him. Lutz clung to Gray's other leg, trembling. Fio and Isoka glared at the guards, leaving them stunned. In his mind, Gray apologized to the children. If anything, the scene made it look as though he was the one bullying the guards. Ariamel then took Gray's hand and urged him to leave. She remarked that when they had been dressed in tattered clothes, the guards had not done a single thing for them. Midway through speaking, Ariamel froze. She quickly apologized to Gray, saying that she had become too worked up. Gray told her there was no need to apologize. He then thanked everyone. The one who was supposed to protect them had ended up being protected instead. In his mind, Gray felt that helping the children back then had been the best decision he had ever made. When they arrived at the inn, Lena and the innkeeper stared at them in shock. Seeing their reactions, Gray pointed out that they seemed far too surprised. Lena and her father jolted. The innkeeper stumbled over his words, while Lena admitted that it would have been stranger if they had not been surprised. Carrying the three younger children, Gray remarked that there was nothing strange about it. The innkeeper scratched his bald head and wondered whether the children were the reason Gray had suddenly bought a house. Gray replied that they were not the only reason. The timing had simply been perfect for both him and the children. He had also felt that it was about time to put down roots in the town. The innkeeper grinned and remarked that Gray had gone and done something that did not suit his face. Gray replied that commenting on his face was unnecessary. The innkeeper laughed, told them to sit wherever they liked, and instructed Lena to start cooking. Lena agreed. Later, after the food was served, Ariamel thought it was delicious. Nina agreed. Ariamel asked Lena if she could teach her the recipe. Delighted to learn that Ariamel could read and write, Lena commented that it was impressive. Gray asked whether the meal was not better than when he had been staying at the inn. The innkeeper explained that food always tasted better when it was shared with family and wondered whether Gray had never realized that. Gray quietly reflected on those words. Hayden remarked that it was no wonder Gray had been putting on weight. The innkeeper told Gray that if anything ever happened, he should come to him. As Gray's senior in both life and parenting, he promised to generously offer advice. Gray responded that he certainly talked big. A few days later, Ariamel and Nina wished Gray a good day as he prepared to leave. Noticing that Ariamel was in unusually high spirits, Gray asked whether something good had happened. Ariamel smiled and explained that she was going shopping with Lena that day. Nina asked about Lena, and Ariamel confirmed it before telling Nina that they could play together another time. Gray realized that the two girls had already become good friends. That evening, Gray wondered what they would be having for dinner. As he headed home, the innkeeper passed by and asked whether he was already leaving despite it still being early. Gray replied that he had finished all of his work for the day. The innkeeper remarked that Lena and Ariamel were getting along well and pointed out that they were shopping nearby. When they looked over, two young men had approached Ariamel and Lena. One claimed that it was no big deal and insisted they would not do anything to the girls. The other said they only wanted to chat and urged the two to come with them. The innkeeper and Gray immediately appeared behind the girls, fixing the young men with murderous glares. The innkeeper remarked that, in that case, they could have a long conversation together. Gray agreed that they would listen to the two of them very carefully. The young men froze in alarm. The innkeeper informed them that they were not allowed to refuse him or Gray and that they had no choice in the matter. Lena and Ariamel called out to their fathers. The innkeeper told Lena to go home, while Gray apologized to Ariamel and instructed her to return home and start preparing dinner. The innkeeper seized one of the young men, and Gray grabbed the other, remarking that they were going to have a proper discussion with them. Later, the two terrified young men sat across from Gray and the innkeeper. The innkeeper warned them never to repeat what they had done. The two immediately agreed, begging the fathers to spare at least their organs. They promised never to do it again and pleaded with them not to harm their families. Gray asked what they were talking about. The two apologized again before fleeing. When Gray returned home, he found Ariamel waiting outside. He told her that she had not needed to wait for him. Ariamel apologized for causing him trouble. Gray told her not to apologize because it did not bother him in the slightest. Helping family was only natural. Ariamel tried to say something but stumbled over her words. Gray called to her, and when she looked up, he admitted that seeing her happily spending time with Lena made him glad. After introducing the two of them, watching them enjoy themselves together had made him happier than anything else. Seeing Ariamel hold herself back bothered him far more. He encouraged her to let him spoil her a little more, just as Lena's father did for Lena. The other children then came outside. Nina tugged on Gray, and he remarked that Nina loved being spoiled too before picking her up. Nina asked whether being spoiled meant her daddy disliked her. Gray assured her that it was the opposite and that spoiling her made him happy. He promised to spoil her as much as she wanted. Nina hugged him in response. Stella climbed up to Gray and wanted to be spoiled as well. Isoka and Fio looked awkward as Gray approached them, seemingly preparing to refuse, but instead he pulled both of them into a big hug. Ariamel shyly asked whether she could join too and whether it would be all right. Gray opened his arms, and she embraced him together with all the children. The next day, Lena told Gray that a rumor was spreading through town claiming that anyone who bothered her or Ariamel would be kidnapped by a pair of nefarious men, so no one dared flirt with them anymore. Gray silently objected that they were law-abiding citizens who had never kidnapped anyone. Back at home, Isoka practiced with his sword. Gray easily sidestepped his swing, causing Isoka to lose his balance and fall. Gray explained that this was why Isoka should never close his eyes while swinging a sword and should always keep his attention on his opponent. Isoka acknowledged the lesson. Gray remembered that Ariamel had asked him to teach Isoka and Fio swordsmanship. They had been working hard to help with the housework and to learn how to read. Gray felt that Ariamel still did not completely approve, but if the three of them had reached an understanding, then he would teach the two for their sake. Magic lessons would have to wait until they had mastered reading because there was no point otherwise. He had nothing to teach anyone who was not serious about learning. There were people who wanted to learn but never had the opportunity, so those who did should make the most of it. Gray told Isoka to take a break because it was now Fio's turn. Fio readily agreed. Meanwhile, at the Church of the Holy Kingdom of Storia, a bishop informed a boy that it was time to leave because all preparations for their departure should have been completed. The armored boy acknowledged him. The bishop said that someone would be sent to make the boy presentable and instructed him to wait there. He then ordered an attendant to prepare a carriage, and the attendant complied. A soldier asked how the boy was doing. The bishop answered that he was the same as ever and remarked that, oracle or not, taking care of such a gloomy child was exhausting. The soldier observed that the boy's strength was genuine. Despite never having held a sword before, he had surpassed the average knight after only 3 months of training. The bishop stated that the next objective was the Saintess, who, if he remembered correctly, was in the neighboring country of Bastok. They needed to bring both the hero and the Saintess up to the level expected of them as quickly as possible. News that the hero had been chosen had already spread to the other countries. The bishop emphasized that the Saintess came from their own country and warned the soldier to watch his tongue because they never knew who might be listening. The soldier acknowledged the warning. Privately, the bishop reflected that the Saintess appeared to come from the merchant class. He found it remarkable that both the hero and the Saintess of this era were orphans. That circumstance allowed them to bring both children back without creating future complications. The bishop announced that they would now depart to welcome Saintess Ariamel. The soldier acknowledged the order. Inwardly, however, the soldier thought that although the bishop called it a welcome, it sounded more like an abduction. Since the Saintess was only a child, he doubted she would make a worthwhile target. They boarded the carriage and began their journey. At the beginning of Chapter 7, after reading a book, Gray found himself thinking about the hero and the Saintess. Isoka asked whether Gray had said something. Gray replied that he had not and instead asked Isoka what he thought about the hero and the Saintess. Isoka answered that he had no particular opinion. Gray then asked Fio the same question. Fio gave the same answer. Although the hero and the Saintess were supposed to save the world, the idea was so grand that it felt like a story from a book. Gray had assumed that, since Isoka was the protagonist and Fio was probably the heroine, they might possess some special bloodline. Judging from their reactions, however, that seemed unlikely. They were not even interested. He decided that he would ask Ariamel and the 3 younger children later. Fio quietly remarked to Isoka that Gray seemed to be thinking very deeply and wondered whether something had happened. Isoka admitted that he did not know. Gray recalled what had happened the previous day. On his way to the Adventurers Guild to report the completion of a quest, Emilia had suddenly told him to come to Valkyrie's party house. Gray had been surprised when Emilia dragged him along. Emilia apologized and asked him to quietly come with her for the time being. Gray was welcomed into their party house. Kasha apologized for calling him over so suddenly and asked him to hear them out. Gray wondered whether it was something that could not be discussed at the guild. Kasha explained that there were simply too many people there. She invited him to sit down while she prepared tea. Gray declined and asked them to tell him what it was about. Halseria asked whether Emilia had already told Gray about the hero. She explained that the hero from the neighboring Holy Kingdom of Storia was on the way to Basto. Gray asked whether she meant the hero chosen by the Oracle. Halseria confirmed it and explained that, for some reason, the hero's group was traveling through the forest instead of using the highways. She had learned this from a fairy friend. Gray recalled hearing that elves, as people of the forest, could perceive fairies. He asked Halseria how she knew the travelers were the hero's group. Halseria explained that the hero was a special existence even to the fairy folk, who had recognized the hero the moment the group entered their territory. Gray could only think that there was no privacy. Halseria added that she had asked whether the hero was traveling alone. The fairy had shaken its head, indicating that the hero was accompanied by others, although it had not revealed how many. Back in the present, Gray asked why Halseria was telling him all of this. Kasha reminded him that Valkyrie had turned down the invitation to join the hero's party. They were not sure what the hero's group was after, so they wanted to be cautious. They also could not fully trust the lord of the city. Emilia added that they had wanted to inform Gray so that he could help if anything happened. Kasha admitted that Emilia had been the one insisting that Gray should know and had taken the initiative to tell him. Gray replied that he would never refuse them. He still considered them his comrades. Inwardly, he thought that the hero avoiding the roads was suspicious. There was also a chance that it had something to do with Isoka and the others. He decided to stop accepting quests for a while and remain with the children. Gray then asked Emilia, Kasha, and Halseria that, if the worst should happen, they take care of his children. The 3 women promised that they would. Gray briefly wondered whether a hero would die if they lost their head. Back at Gray's home, he noticed that Ariamel was taking an unusually long time. Fio suggested that perhaps Nina, Stella, and Lutz were having trouble falling asleep. Gray decided to check on them. When he entered the room, he found all 4 of them sound asleep. He gently covered them with a blanket. Isoka followed him and asked where Ariamel was. Gray explained that Ariamel had fallen asleep together with the others upstairs and reminded him to keep his voice down. Fio and Isoka nodded. Gray reflected that Fio and Isoka had been working especially hard lately. He wondered whether the hero's objective involved the children, the girls, or something else entirely. Whatever the case, he was determined to protect them. For now, there was only one thing he could do. Just then, someone knocked on the door. Fio stood up and wondered whether they had a visitor. Gray told her to continue studying while he answered the door. Fio agreed. Keeping a hand on his sword, Gray opened the door and asked who it was. A voice outside replied that it was Emilia and that she had come with some information. Gray asked whether she was alone. Emilia asked whether that was a problem. Gray said it was not and invited her inside. Emilia declined, explaining that Kasha had instructed her to return immediately, and apologized. Emilia reported that Halseria had said the hero's group had apparently left the forest. If they continued directly toward the city, they would arrive in less than half a day. She then handed Gray a magical communication device and instructed him to be careful. She explained that she would keep the matching device. Although they could not speak through it directly, if Gray held one of the stones and concentrated, the other stone would shine brightly, allowing Valkyrie to know that something had happened and that they should come immediately. Gray was amazed. He realized that devices like these had not existed back when he was a member of One Blade because they had been relatively expensive. Apparently, some adventurers now carried them as lucky charms. They were normally used by parties while exploring dungeons, and they could also provide a general idea of where the matching device was located. Gray thanked Emilia and asked her to use her own device as well if anything happened. Emilia agreed and said that, if the situation arose, they would be counting on him. After Emilia left, Gray reflected that he had been adventuring alone for so long that he had never learned about these devices. He decided to buy some for Isoka and the others to carry. Isoka wondered who the visitor had been. Gray explained that it had been Emilia and that she had already finished what she came to do and left. Fio asked whether Emilia was one of Gray's former party members who had visited the house before. Gray confirmed that she was the blonde swordswoman. Fio remarked that she was the pretty lady. She and Isoka began whispering to each other while Gray prepared some tea. Gray told the two of them to drink up. Fio thanked him before calling out to him. Gray asked what it was. Fio hesitantly asked whether Emilia had been Gray's girlfriend. Gray choked on his drink. Fio quickly regretted asking, but Gray assured her that it was fine and asked what had given her that impression. Isoka handed Gray a handkerchief. Fio explained that when Emilia had visited before, the way she looked at Gray had been completely different from the way she looked at anyone else. Gray admitted that they had dated when they were in the same party but had broken up a long time ago. Emilia was his former girlfriend. Fio asked why they had broken up. Isoka told her not to pry. Gray explained that there had been no particular reason. They had simply drifted apart, and that happened all the time. Fio was about to ask what he meant by drifting apart, but Isoka stopped her. Gray thought that was all they were getting out of him. He did not know what Emilia intended to do regarding the nobles, and he wondered whether things like that were really so interesting. Just then, Ariamel came running in and apologized, saying that she would prepare lunch. Isoka reminded her that they had already eaten together. Ariamel suddenly realized what had happened and admitted that she had been dreaming. She crouched down before standing again with her face covered. Ariamel said she was going to wash her face. Gray remarked that she had quite an impressive case of bed hair. Fio quietly reminded him that he should not say something like that to Ariamel because she was a young lady. Gray realized that Fio was right. Even so, he wondered whether it would not be worse if Ariamel never knew. When evening came, Gray offered to help Ariamel prepare dinner. Ariamel blushed and said she wanted to handle it by herself that day if he did not mind. Gray agreed. He wondered whether she had entered a rebellious phase. The next morning, Gray stepped outside. Fio and Lutz were already there, and Nina called out to him while waving. Gray waved back. A voice remarked that Gray really looked like a father now. Gray turned to see the innkeeper and asked what he was doing there, jokingly wondering whether Lena had finally thrown him out. The innkeeper told Gray to be quiet after he had gone through the trouble of bringing over some leftover soup. He commented that it was his first time seeing Gray's house and that it was a nice place. Handing Gray a pot, he told him to take it. Gray accepted it. The innkeeper then lowered his voice and warned Gray that some men had been asking about Ariamel at both the inn and the guild's tavern. They were dressed like mercenaries or adventurers, but they were unusually well-mannered, so Gray should be careful. Gray said that he understood and thanked him. The innkeeper walked away, saying there was no need for thanks. Ariamel was Lena's friend and Gray's family, so of course he was going to help. Nina waved goodbye to him. Gray thought that the innkeeper was being bashful. Gray carried the pot inside. Nina told Ariamel that Lena's daddy had brought it over. Gray explained that it was because they had leftovers. Ariamel was delighted. Gray remarked that they should bring something to Lena's family next time. Ariamel agreed and suggested that everyone wash their hands before eating. That evening, someone suddenly knocked on the door. Ariamel was about to stand, but Gray told her that he would answer it. He instructed her to stay out of sight. Receiving no reply, Gray added that if he had to go somewhere, he might be home late, so she should not wait up. Ariamel agreed. Gray knocked on the door in return and asked who it was, noting that it was already late. A voice apologized for disturbing him and introduced themselves as members of the mercenary group Night Mist Hawks. They claimed that a certain noble had hired them to search for a missing girl named Ariamel and asked whether Gray knew her. Gray immediately concluded that it was a blatant lie. If a noble truly needed to find someone, there was no reason to hire mercenaries unless it was wartime. A noble would normally use private guards or high-ranking adventurers bound by the law. Adventurers carried identification cards issued by the guild, and to keep those cards valid across multiple countries, they were subject to legal restrictions and guild principles. Violations could result in fines, suspension, or even the loss of adventurer status. High-ranking adventurers were also obligated to prioritize requests from nobles and royalty. Mercenaries, however, had no such restrictions and relied entirely on personal trust for their work. That meant these men likely had close ties to the noble they claimed to represent. They probably knew Gray was an adventurer and expected him to accept their story if they pretended to be adventurers themselves. Gray concluded that they could not be trusted. Gray told them to wait before opening the door. One of the men thanked him and again brought up Ariamel. Gray asked for the name of the noble who had hired them. The mercenary replied that he could not disclose that information because it was confidential under the terms of their contract. Gray answered that, in that case, he had nothing more to say to them and told them to leave. He thought that asking about a missing person while refusing to identify the client was impossible to believe. Perhaps the mercenary expected him to fill in the gaps on his own, but that would not work. Gray would not answer their questions even if they claimed to be acting on behalf of royalty. The mercenaries were about to make a move when Gray turned back and fixed them with a glare. They froze in shock. One of them asked whether there was truly no way Gray would tell them. Gray replied that there was none. He then remarked that they did not seem very familiar with the area for mercenaries. The other mercenary asked what he meant by that. Gray answered that it was nothing and repeated that it was time for them to leave. It was already past his children's bedtime. If they had anything else to discuss, they could return another day. Inwardly, Gray thought that he did not want blood spilled inside the house. The mercenaries exchanged whispers before glancing past Gray. They then said they understood. One of them stated that they would take their leave and speak with him again the following day. Gray concluded that they undoubtedly had another companion waiting at the back door. However, the house had once belonged to an all-female adventurer party. Both the front and back doors were exceptionally sturdy, and the windows were protected by magical security measures. Breaking in would not be easy. He also expected them to wait until he appeared to have gone to bed before attempting a surprise attack. If they were after Ariamel, they would likely leave only her alive and eliminate any witnesses. That would be a predictable mistake. Smiling to himself, Gray decided that he had no intention of sitting around waiting to be attacked. He would make the first move. Meanwhile, Emilia came running toward Gray while dragging a captive. Elsewhere, the members of Night Mist Hawks compared the information they had gathered. According to their intelligence, the man was hiding the girl in that house. Another agreed. One of them remarked that Gray looked like a scoundrel at first glance. Although he was apparently a capable adventurer, he was nothing more than a low-class thug. They dismissed his talk about the children's bedtime, insisting there was no way those children were actually his. Another suggested that they were probably slaves or orphans. The Saintess had also been said to be an orphan. Whatever Gray's reason for gathering them, it could not possibly be for anything good. Another mercenary silently concluded that it was undoubtedly something too dreadful even to name. One of the mercenaries declared that they should report to the bishop and finish the matter that very day as soon as they rendezvoused with Soma. At that moment, a voice sounded from behind them, calmly remarking that Soma was the man's name after all. The mercenaries turned toward the speaker, only to see Gray standing there with a grin as he let out a quiet breath. Gray dragged the bloodied mercenary he had already captured and told the remaining two not to leave their trash lying around. At the beginning of Chapter 8, one of the mercenaries stared at Gray in horror and demanded to know what he had done to their companion. Gray replied that there was no need to shout because he could hear them perfectly well. He explained that the man he was holding, or rather the piece of trash, had been sneaking around behind his house. When his companion resisted after being apprehended, he had been forced to incapacitate him. No matter how they looked at it, the mercenary had been the one in the wrong. Gray threw the injured mercenary back to his companions, pointing out that he was still alive. Since he had returned their companion, they now owed him some answers. He demanded to know why they were searching for Ariamel, what they intended to do after finding her, and where their bishop was. The mercenaries were shocked that Gray already knew about the bishop. They concluded that they could no longer allow him to live. Gray tossed his sword aside and asked whether they still refused to answer. When they remained silent, he declared that they should die instead and slashed the black-haired mercenary's arm. The remaining mercenary was stunned by Gray's speed. Gray turned his gaze toward him and swung his weapon again. The mercenary's head fell to the ground. Halsaria then asked whether Gray had finished. Gray asked if she had seen everything. Halsaria confirmed that she had. Gray wondered why she had bothered asking. Halsaria remarked that Gray was as merciless as ever. Gray replied that there was no need to show mercy. Anyone who threatened the peace and quiet of his children was his enemy. Inwardly, he believed that anyone prepared to take something from others should also be prepared to lose something themselves, although he would take it regardless. Halsaria teased Gray for being the doting parent type. Gray told her to be quiet, insisting that it was only natural for a parent to treasure and spoil their children. Halsaria continued teasing him, suggesting that he should hurry up and get a wife, perhaps even their leader. Gray answered that if Emilia heard that, there was no telling what she would do. Grinning, Halsaria remarked that Emilia would simply turn bright red from embarrassment. Gray brushed the topic aside and asked whether Halsaria knew where the hero was. She pointed toward a location just outside the city and explained that the hero looked exactly as the spirits had described, leaving her confident it was the correct group. Gray observed that being outside the city meant a little commotion would not matter. Halsaria reported that there were 5 people altogether. The hero, one person wearing an excessively elaborate robe, another clad in pure white armor, and 2 men who looked just like the mercenaries lying on the ground. Gray understood and thanked her. He reflected that Halsaria was not only an excellent archer but also an outstanding scout, far beyond his own abilities in that area. Halsaria casually mentioned that the hero's group had been snacking on apples gathered from the forest. Gray found the detail oddly depressing. Halsaria asked whether Gray was going after them and said she would support him. She added that if she returned now, Emilia, who had reluctantly stayed behind to guard the house, would only become angry with her. Gray accepted her offer and asked for her assistance. Gray had entrusted Emilia and Kasha with protecting the children at the house. Emilia had seemed eager to accompany him, but she was at least as strong as he was, perhaps even stronger. She was the only person he trusted to protect the children. He also hoped that she and Ariamel would get along better than they had the last time. Meanwhile, the bishop and his group were camped outside Basto. The bishop complained that the mercenaries they had sent were late and questioned whether they could not even handle such a simple task. Another mercenary apologized, explaining that they had received no further reports since that afternoon. The information they had received was only that Saintess Ariamel had been taken in by an adventurer living in town. The bishop dismissed the adventurer as nothing more than a lowly man who worked from morning until night. He believed that a little money would be enough to make the man hand Ariamel over. One mercenary suggested that if the adventurer knew Ariamel was the saintess, he might try to demand something beyond his station. The bishop replied that, if that happened, they had many ways to deal with it. For now, all they needed was confirmation that Ariamel was truly there. Growing irritated, the bishop noted that they had sent 3 knights, yet none had returned. He wanted to finish the matter quickly and bring the saintess back to the holy kingdom of Storia. Doing so would secure a bright future for him and might even earn him promotion to vicar. Even if negotiations failed, they could simply sneak in at night, abduct the saintess by force, and silence any witnesses. The hero quietly listened to them muttering among themselves. He realized that Saintess Ariamel would also be separated from the people she cared about. A voice from across the camp remarked that the hero was unbearably gloomy. The speaker said the hero should have simply let him handle everything. The bishop looked over and saw Landi, the 7th seat of the Holy Knights of Storia. Landi declared that he was the strongest person there, so the bishop should let him settle the matter. He complained that he was growing irritated sitting around without a woman to share his bed. The bishop knew that, in terms of ability, Landi would not lose to an A-rank adventurer. However, Landi was far from selective about women. If he were sent to retrieve the saintess, there was no doubt he would satisfy his own desires first. The bishop refused, stating that Landi was his bodyguard and therefore had to remain by his side and protect him. Landi accepted the order. Just then, a voice remarked that the atmosphere there was rather unpleasant. Gray walked toward the camp. The bishop asked who he was and what business had brought him there. Gray replied that they were the stalkers who had been sniffing around his daughter. Everyone present looked at him in confusion. The mercenaries were stunned and exclaimed in disbelief before turning toward the bishop. The bishop ordered them to remain silent, stating that their failure to complete such a simple task was their own fault. The mercenaries turned back to Gray. The bishop asked Gray what his objective was. Gray replied that he had come to settle the matter. With a sigh, the bishop asked how much Gray wanted. Gray frowned. The bishop assumed that Gray was only after money and asked how much it would take for him to hand over the saintess. Gray's expression darkened as he asked whether Ariamel was the saintess. The bishop confirmed that she had been chosen by the oracle. He further remarked that it did not matter whether Ariamel was still a virgin. Gray's face turned cold as he questioned what the bishop had just said. The bishop clarified that it did not matter even if Gray had already slept with her. Gray immediately raised his weapon and declared that the bishop should die. Fortunately, Landi intercepted the attack before it could reach its target. Gray remarked that it had been close. Landi replied that it would cause far too much trouble if the bishop were killed there and stated that he would face Gray himself. The bishop, horrified that Gray had dared to raise a weapon against him, raged that a mere adventurer had no right to do so. He called out to Aless. Aless flinched. The bishop ordered him to kill the adventurer. Hesitantly, Aless pointed his blade toward Gray. Landi warned Gray to keep his eyes on him. Gray was forced backward. Gray glanced at the hero. The hero was still only a child and looked nothing like the image Gray had expected. Although Gray did not know how strong the hero was, he judged that the man in white armor was probably the more skilled fighter. Halseria had not returned yet. It was effectively the hero and a holy knight against a single adventurer. Gray decided that his first priority would be to remove the hero from the fight. He turned his gaze toward the hero, but before he could make a move, Landi struck the hero and knocked him back. Landi declared that he could handle Gray by himself and ordered the hero not to interfere. At the beginning of Chapter 9, the bishop demanded to know what Landi was doing. Landi told him to be quiet. Irritated, Landi thought that a holy knight could not afford to rely on the hero to defeat a mere adventurer. He declared that if he killed Gray before they brought the saintess back, the bishop had better let him have Ariamel. Landi narrowly dodged Gray's attack. Gray declared that he had had enough and that he would send Landi to meet his god. He leaped forward and swung his sword, but Landi blocked the strike with his own blade. Gray told him to die content. The force of the clash cracked the ground beneath Landi's feet. Far away, Halseria noticed the explosion. She quietly remarked on it, observed the area for a moment, and then began leaping from branch to branch toward the source. As he struggled to withstand Gray's assault, Landi trembled and questioned whether Gray was truly just an adventurer. The bishop shouted at Landi to hurry up and kill him, demanding to know what had become of all his earlier confidence. Their swords collided again, and Landi snapped at the bishop to be quiet. He even threatened to kill the bishop first if he did not stop talking. The bishop immediately fell silent in fear. Londi launched another attack. He questioned what Gray was aiming for as Gray raised his weapon once more with a broad grin. Gray remarked that rapists deserved to be castrated. Londi remained on the defensive, cursing Gray as they fought. Gray slid backward under the force of Londi's attack. He realized that Londi had managed to push him back despite the enhancement magic Gray had cast on himself. Londi declared that Gray would die. Deciding to finish the battle, he resolved to use his special technique. He proclaimed that he would thoroughly violate the Saintess in front of Gray's corpse. Just as Londi prepared to unleash his secret hidden cloud magic, an arrow struck him in the groin. Shock flashed across his face. Gray seized the opening without hesitation and cut off Londi's head. Londi's severed head rolled across the ground toward the bishop and the mercenaries. The mercenaries froze in place, while the bishop looked toward the unconscious hero in horror. Overcome with fear, he desperately wondered how he could escape with his life. In Gray's mind, he had never expected Londi to attack with a technique so full of openings. The moment had caught even him by surprise. Halseria arrived and reported that everything was finished. Gray thanked her and praised her work. The bishop trembled uncontrollably as Gray remarked that he had kept him waiting. Gray asked whether the bishop had finished praying to his god. Looking at the bishop's expression, Gray wondered what was wrong with his face. Grinning, he remarked that the bishop was about to meet his precious god and ought to be a little happier. The bishop desperately tried to negotiate. He warned that if Gray killed him, the church would not remain silent, then promised that he would personally see to it that Gray was richly rewarded. Gray rejected the offer. The bishop then offered women. Gray stated that he had no interest. Next, the bishop offered him a position among the Holy Knights, claiming that with Gray's ability, he could even become the second seat. Gray told the bishop not to worry because they could settle the matter with reparations instead. The bishop's hopes returned as he concluded that Gray wanted money. There was nothing wrong with that, he reasoned, because everyone needed money to live. He eagerly asked how much Gray wanted. Gray remarked that it was a funny question. Thinking back, he realized he had already been paid for 4 of them. The mercenaries suddenly seemed to understand what he meant. One tried to speak, while another hurriedly begged for mercy, swearing that they would never again lay a hand on Gray, his family, or anyone connected to him. Gray asked what exactly they were so afraid of. According to the teachings of their church, those who followed the word of God and accumulated good deeds would spend eternity after death in a world free of war and starvation. If they truly had clear consciences, then they should have no fear of dying. If they had sins to atone for, then they should die and atone for them. Gray declared that he would take their lives as recompense because it was a remarkably cheap price to pay. Gray killed the remaining mercenaries. He had no intention of making the mistake of sparing his enemies only for them to return later. Nor would he ever lose sight of what he needed to protect. The bishop collapsed to the ground in tears, begging Gray to spare his life because he did not want to die. Gray replied that the bishop had misunderstood. Gray was not the one to whom he should be praying. Even God must have grown tired of waiting. Just then, Halseria called out to Gray. Gray asked what it was. Halseria explained that she thought the bishop should receive something before he died. She held up a cross-shaped necklace. The bishop immediately recognized it. Halseria explained that she had taken it from the men the bishop had left behind as guards. She also informed him that his horses had been released, making his carriage useless. Halseria tossed the necklace toward the bishop and asked whether he had teleportation stones. Before the bishop could respond, Gray severed his arm. It fell to the ground together with several teleportation stones. Teleportation stones were magical tools that functioned exactly as their name suggested. They were single-use items with an extremely poor cost-to-performance ratio. Despite their outrageous price, they could only transport someone roughly 2 kilometers. Gray realized that the bishop had still intended to escape using the concealed teleportation stones. Calling him a stubborn bastard, Gray told him to stop struggling and die already. The bishop's eyes widened. Before he could utter another word, his head rolled across the ground. Gray then walked over to the hero. He stated that he knew the hero had been awake the entire time and told him to stop pretending. The hero quietly sat up. Gray explained that he had a few questions and wanted honest answers. He asked whether the hero's name was Alesh because he had heard the others call him that. Alesh confirmed that it was. Gray then asked how old he was. Alesh answered that he had probably turned 13 that year. Gray realized that Alesh was the same age as Ariamel. He was still only a child. Gray asked why Alesh had said, probably. Alesh explained that he had been told he was abandoned in front of an orphanage as a baby, so he did not know his exact age. Gray asked whether the orphanage had been in Storia. Alesh replied that it had been in Kodarl instead. Halseria recognized the name. The kingdom of Kodarl lay beyond the holy kingdom of Storia, and roughly 1/3 of the country was covered by forest. Gray asked what a boy from Kodarl was doing serving as the hero of Storia. Alish explained that one day a group identifying themselves as emissaries from the Holy Kingdom of Storia had suddenly arrived at his orphanage. The bishop had pointed at Alish and declared that he was the hero chosen by the oracle and that he would accompany them to the Holy Kingdom of Storia. Alish had asked the bishop to allow his friends to come with him. The bishop refused, saying that only Alish could be taken to the holy city. Instead, Holy Storia would take responsibility for the orphanage. However, if Alish refused to come, they would take him by force, and they could not guarantee the safety of the other children. A little girl had looked at Alish with tears in her eyes. Alish had called her Mia. At the time, Alish had not known whether the bishop intended to keep his promise, but he realized they would take him by force regardless. He had therefore agreed to go. The bishop had then made him promise one more thing. If anyone asked where he came from, he was to say Storia. As before, the bishop warned that if Alish disobeyed, there was no telling what would happen to the other orphans. From that day onward, Alish had traveled with the bishop. Alish told Gray that they had come to Bastok to bring back the saintess chosen by the oracle. He believed that Ariamel would end up suffering the same fate that he had. Gray quietly remarked that he understood. Gray then asked Alish how well he could fight. Alish answered that Londi's training had made him stronger than an average knight, but he still could not compare to a holy knight. Against Londi, he would have had no chance. Gray glanced at Londi's body and reflected that this was what a holy knight was like. He had expected someone much more disciplined. The holy knights of Storia were famous even in Bastok. Their ranks were determined by strength, and those holding the 5th seat or higher were reportedly granted holy weapons. Gray wondered what to do with the hero. Emotionally, he wanted to send Alish back to his hometown rather than kill him. Halsaria yawned and remarked that they should head back because she was getting sleepy. Gray agreed, noting that it was already late. He invited Alish to stay at the inn for the night. Alish accepted. Gray decided that he would consult the children before allowing Alish to stay at the house. Gray then collected the bishop's money. Halsaria commented that it was rather shameless. Gray asked what she meant. The dead had no need for money. He considered it an inconvenience fee. Adventurers who defeated bandits were free to keep their spoils, so this was no different. Halsaria remarked that there would also be repair costs, and there were many expenses to cover. Gray admitted that she had a point. He would also need money to send Alish back home. He told Halsaria that, if she understood, there was no need to keep talking about it. Gray walked over to the teleportation stones. Halsaria asked whether he intended to sell them. Gray replied that he would use them to dispose of the bodies somewhere remote, where goblins or other monsters would take care of the rest. Gray activated the teleportation stone. A circular light appeared beneath the corpses before they disappeared. Gray concluded that, judging by how secretly the bishop's group had been operating, they had never informed Bastok's authorities of their arrival. Otherwise, they would certainly have entered the country openly and in force. Because of that, Storia could not make a public issue out of their disappearance. A high-ranking church official, his guards, and the hero had entered another nation without notice and then vanished. There was no way they could openly explain what had happened. Gray asked Halsaria to go ahead and meet up with Emilia and the others while he escorted Alish to the inn. Halsaria agreed and bid Alish farewell. Upon arriving at the inn, Gray asked the innkeeper to let Alish stay there and paid for 2 nights in advance. The innkeeper agreed. As payment beyond the room fee, he asked Gray to tell him stories of his exploit. Since it was the middle of the night, Gray ignored the request and led Alish to his room. At the door, Gray told Alish to get a good night's sleep and assured him that he would return in the morning. Alish called out to Gray before he left. He thanked Gray for paying for the room and promised to repay him someday. Gray replied that there was no need because it was not even his own money. Alish hesitantly accepted that answer. Gray closed the door and headed home. At the beginning of Chapter 10, when Gray returned home, Halsaria informed him that she had already explained everything to the others. Gray thanked her. Emilia commented that Gray had even saved the hero and remarked that he honestly had never changed. Kasha added that, because it was Gray, they had expected nothing less. Gray had thought Emilia would be angry with him. Instead, she asked what he intended to do with the hero. Gray explained that he would first consult the children. If they did not mind, Alish would stay with them for the time being. Alish had been separated from his friends back home. There were many issues that needed to be addressed, but Gray intended to begin by gathering information. He was certain that the hero wanted to see his friends again, and Gray wanted to make that happen. Emilia told Gray that if anything else happened, he should let them know because they would help however they could. Gray thanked Emilia and apologized for causing her so much trouble. Emilia paused, visibly flustered, before replying that they were friends, so there was no need for him to hold back. Gray suggested that they stop talking outside and invited them inside for tea and coffee. Emilia awkwardly tried to decline. Kasha told her to give up because she would have to overcome this hurdle eventually. Gray was left confused. Emilia struggled to answer, her face turning bright red. In the end, she turned away and said she would pass for that day. Kasha muttered that she had not expected Emilia to flee in the face of the enemy. Turning to Halsaria, she declared that they would hold a strategy meeting the next day. Halsaria complained that it sounded like a pain and remarked that Emilia would probably lose her nerve again anyway. Kasha told her not to say that, then apologized to Gray and explained that they would be heading home as well. Halsaria bid him farewell. After catching up to Emilia, Kasha struck her lightly with her staff. Gray went inside and found Ariamel asleep on the couch. He told her that he was home and asked whether she had waited up for him. When he called to her again, he realized she was still asleep. She let out quiet groans. Gray thought she must have been having a nightmare. As he carefully picked her up, he wished he could help her even in her dreams. Still asleep, Ariamel dreamed that she was alone in a place that was dark and cold. She did not know where she was or why she was there. Looking around, she thought she had to hurry home because Nina and the others must be hungry. She wondered whether there was anything to eat. As the oldest, she had to stay strong, but she did not know how to get back. Then she remembered. The shack where they had all lived had burned down. Her mother and father had died. She had met everyone else and together they had started a new life. They had little money and little food, but supporting one another had made their lives warm and happy. Suddenly, there was nothing left. Men burst into their home. Ariamel fought back, trying to stop them from taking the children, but one of the men ordered her not to talk back. He grabbed Nina. When Lutz approached, the man kicked him, sending him crashing to the ground. Another man seized Ariamel and ordered her to behave. He declared that, from that day onward, she was a slave. Her dream became a mixture of the events from the game and the life that would have awaited her had Gray never reached out to them. A collar was fastened around Ariamel's neck. She was whipped until she collapsed to the ground. She apologized to everyone. The man then violated her before throwing her into a prison cell, where she survived on almost no food. One day, she was suddenly informed that she had been chosen by the Oracle as the Saintess. Her eyes widened. She also learned that a young man had been chosen as the hero and that the two of them should get along well. The man who had assaulted her offered a hollow apology for everything. In Ariamel's mind, nothing made sense anymore. She wanted everyone to give everything back. Laughing madly, she cursed them all and wished for them to suffer and die. With those thoughts, she stabbed herself and died. Her final regret was that she had failed to protect Isoka, Fio, Lutz, Stella, and Nina. She had not been able to do anything for them. Everything around her was cold and lonely. She called out for someone. Gradually, she felt warmth instead. She thought of her mother and father and wondered whether she was resting in their embrace. Ariamel slowly opened her eyes and found Gray carrying her. Gray apologized for waking her. He asked whether she had been having a frightening dream because she had been moaning in her sleep. Ariamel admitted that she could not really remember it. Gray accepted that answer. Carrying her toward the stairs, Gray reminded her that he had told her to go to bed earlier because she would catch a cold if she slept on the sofa. Ariamel apologized and explained that there had been something she absolutely wanted to say once Gray came home. Gray asked whether that was what she had stayed awake for. Ariamel confirmed it. She quietly welcomed Gray home. Gray was taken by surprise. In his previous life, returning home had always been unbearably painful. The house had been empty, yet it had been filled with memories. Every time he thought about them, a sharp ache filled his heart. He hated that feeling, but he never truly wanted to forget. Those memories of his family were the ones he treasured most. Small moments, meaningless conversations, and trivial memories would suddenly resurface, each one precious and warm. Even after there was no one left to answer him, he had continued saying that he was leaving and that he was home. Deep down, all he had ever wanted was a family. Back in the present, Gray answered that he was home. Ariamel smiled at him. At that moment, Gray realized once again that he wanted to remain a family with these children. At the start of Chapter 11, Ariamel asked whether everyone could sleep in Gray's room that night. She thought the other children had already gathered there. Gray understood and opened the door. All 5 of the other children were already asleep. He gently laid Ariamel down beside them, and she thanked him. Ariamel told him to lie down wherever there was room. Gray agreed. Before long, she grew drowsy and fell asleep. Looking at the sleeping children, Gray thought that the bed was a little too small for all 7 of them. If he wanted to keep seeing their sleeping faces, he should buy a larger bed. After all, he was the one taking up the most space. Then another thought occurred to him. If the younger children used him as a bed instead, that would solve the problem. He considered it a brilliant idea. Suddenly, someone tugged on him. It was Nina, who needed to use the toilet. Gray calmly, quickly, and without hesitation carried her there. After she finished, he praised her for doing a good job. Nina asked him to carry her again. Gray picked her up, gently patted her back, and she soon fell asleep. When he returned to the room, Stella was awake and wanted the same treatment. Gray promptly picked her up with the practiced ease of a father. After settling Stella back into bed, he returned once more and noticed Lutz fidgeting. Gray told him to wait a moment, but Lutz had already wet his pajamas and burst into tears. Gray comforted Lutz, assuring him that everything was all right and that he would clean it up. He told him it was no big deal, removed the soiled pajamas, and continued reassuring him. Stella also tried to comfort Lutz, telling him that everything was okay. Gray knew that logic and reason would not reach a crying child. Trying to explain everything would only confuse him further. Later, Gray finally lay down to sleep. He found himself stuck in the middle of the children. He realized he needed to wash Lutz's pajamas that night before they became stained. Quietly slipping out of bed, he retrieved them and washed them in the washroom. By the time he finished, he could hear birds chirping outside. He realized that morning had already arrived. After hanging the pajamas out to dry, he felt exhausted. However, he knew that if he went back to sleep now, he would only become the target of Nina and the others' morning mischief. Later, Nina was already shaking him awake because it was breakfast time. Stella pinched his cheek because Ariamel was calling for him. Gray decided to surrender to his fate and sleepily told them that he was getting up. Later, Isoka greeted Gray with a good morning and reminded him that breakfast would be ready soon, so he should wash his face. Gray agreed and went to do so. As he washed up, he wondered what kind of relationship Isoka and Alish had shared in the game. The protagonist and the hero were bound to have crossed paths. They might have been companions, rivals, or perhaps even enemies. That had only been true in the game, however. Now, Gray simply hoped they would get along. During breakfast, Gray asked everyone to keep eating while he brought up something important. He explained that there was someone he wanted to look after at the house for a while and asked the children to be kind to Alish. He then asked whether they were all right with Alish staying with them. The children exchanged glances. Nina curiously wondered whether there would be a new person. Stella responded with a thumbs up. Ariamel said she had no objection, and both Isoka and Fio agreed as well. Gray reflected that he had deliberately left out the parts about the hero, the saintess, the church, the holy knights, and everything else surrounding the situation. He did not want the children to agree simply because they felt pressured not to trouble him. Later, Fio and Isoka helped the 3 younger children carry the dishes. Ariamel thanked the younger ones for being so helpful, and all 3 beamed proudly. Nina ran over to Gray to tell him that she had done well. Lutz smiled at him, while Stella proudly reported that they had finished. Gray hugged the 3 younger children, deeply moved. He quietly appreciated the rewards of being a father. Afterward, Gray left the house with a yawn. He entered a tavern, and the men inside instinctively glared at him before recognizing who he was and hurriedly looking away. Gray glanced around, took a seat at the counter, and waited. The bartender asked what he would like to order. Gray tossed a few coins onto the counter and requested whatever drink the bartender recommended for that amount. The bartender quickly pocketed the money and served him a drink. Gray looked at it briefly before emptying it in a single gulp. He then walked back outside. Thinking that this person always had an unnecessarily roundabout way of arranging meetings, Gray headed toward a bench where someone was already waiting. He sat down behind the man. The man greeted Gray, remarking that it had been a long time and that it was unusual for Gray to seek him out. Gray immediately skipped the pleasantries and told the broker that he wanted him to investigate something. The broker noted that Gray had gone out of his way to contact him and asked what he wanted investigated. Gray explained that he had taken in a boy from an orphanage in Kodarl who had been traveling with members of the Storian clergy. He wanted to know what had become of the orphanage. If it no longer existed, he wanted to learn where the children who had lived there had gone. After hearing the names Kodarl and Storia, the broker remarked that the investigation would cover quite a large area and therefore would not be cheap. He asked whether that was acceptable. Gray asked for the price. The broker requested 200 gold in advance and another 200 upon completion, for a total of 400 gold. Gray accepted the deal. The broker examined the pouch of coins and remarked that the amount was correct. He explained that the investigation would take several days and assured Gray that he would not disappear with the advance payment. Gray replied that the broker was free to do as he pleased, but if he did run away, Gray would hunt him to the ends of the earth and kill him. The broker remarked that the threat was dreadful and promised to conduct a thorough investigation before disappearing. Back at the inn, the innkeeper remarked that Gray had finally arrived. He explained that the boy had been worried and had begun wondering whether he had been abandoned. Apparently, Alish had remained in his room the entire time. The innkeeper told Gray to go upstairs. Gray agreed. Lena greeted Gray and asked what had brought him there that day. Gray explained that he had come for Alish, the boy staying in one of the rooms. Lena realized that Alish was an acquaintance of Gray's and asked whether he would also be living at Gray's house. Gray replied that he would be staying there for the time being before asking whether something about Alish bothered her. Lena replied that nothing was wrong. Alish did not seem like a bad person, although she trailed off before finishing her thought and instead remarked that he seemed very meek. Gray noticed that Lena had almost said something else. She excused herself, saying she needed to get back to cleaning, and apologized for delaying him. Gray told her it was fine. Gray knocked on Alish's door. Alesh invited him inside. Upon seeing him, Gray apologized for taking so long. Alesh called out to him. Gray asked what was wrong. With a gloomy expression, Alesh quietly asked whether he himself seemed gloomy. Gray immediately regretted asking Lena about Alesh. At the beginning of chapter 12, Gray advised Alesh not to let it get to him because they were going shopping to get him some everyday necessities. Alesh agreed. He was in awe because, back in Storia, he had only gone back and forth between his room and training, and it had been a long time since he had gone shopping. Gray understood. Alesh looked at an apple. Gray wondered if he wanted apples. Alesh recalled that, at the orphanage where he had been raised, they were given small fruits for dessert on special days. Even though he had received high-class meals as the hero, the fruit they had eaten back then somehow felt like a greater luxury. He wondered if that was strange. Gray was puzzled at first, then smiled, thinking that food eaten with family was always delicious and wondering if Alesh had never realized that. Alesh remembered the other children and smiled, realizing it was true. Since meeting the children, Gray could not help but look forward to mealtimes. He felt capable of anything if it meant protecting that lifestyle. He was so blessed that he could say that with complete certainty. When Gray arrived home, Ariamel welcomed him. Gray thanked her. Ariamel asked if the boy with him was Alesh and invited him inside. She wanted to begin with introductions and called for everyone to gather. Gray told her not to worry about the bags and apologized for the intrusion. Ariamel decided to prepare tea as well and had them make themselves comfortable in the living room. Alesh asked if the girl was Ariamel. Gray confirmed that she was the one Storia had decided to call the Saintess and that she was a precious member of his family. Alesh fell silent. Gray urged him to go ahead and Alesh agreed. Gray believed Alesh was feeling guilty about being involved in the plan to take Ariamel away, and he decided that he would have to help Alesh clear the air at some point. Theo and Isoka introduced themselves. An awkward silence settled between Isoka and Alesh. Gray noticed it and wondered if it was because of their relationship in the game. 3 little toddlers walked toward Alesh. Nina looked at him in awe and Lutz climbed onto him. Alesh glanced at Gray in silent appeal for help, but Gray pretended not to notice. He inwardly apologized because he wanted to watch a little longer. Alesh soon realized Gray had no intention of helping. Nina then ran over to Gray and excitedly babbled that she was Alessa's One-Isan. No one understood what she meant. Gray understood that Aresh referred to Alesh and that One-Isan meant big sister, but he still could not make sense of it. Nina repeated that Alesh was her little brother. Alesh was surprised. Fia wondered why Nina was the One-Isan. Nina explained that she had come home first, while Alesh had joined the family afterward. Gray finally understood that she meant the order in which they had become part of the family. He acknowledged that he understood, while Alesh looked at him in complete confusion. Now that Alesh had been welcomed into their home, the children's reactions varied. Ariamel and Theo were surprisingly reserved about it. Isoka spoke even less than usual around someone he did not know. Stella and Lutz did not become attached to just anyone and had already lost interest in Alesh. Nina appeared to debate whether to give Alesh her snack before ultimately eating it herself. Gray told Alesh they would pick a room for him. Alesh thanked him and pointed to the room at the very end of the house. Gray agreed. He told Alesh not to worry about the other children and wondered why he had chosen the room farthest away from everyone. Alesh insisted it was nothing like that and explained that being at the end was simply very comforting. Gray immediately understood. It was because Alesh was the chosen hero. Gray asked Alesh if he had settled in and invited him to come with him for a while. Alesh agreed. Gray told him they were going outside. Although confused, Alesh accepted. Gray knew that if they found Alesh's friends from the orphanage, Alesh would probably leave. He could neither force Alesh to stay nor make him travel alongside him. The only thing he could do was help Alesh become as strong as possible during the limited time they had together. Gray asked Alesh if he could use magic. Alesh admitted that he could not at all because Storia had never assigned him an instructor. Gray understood. He then challenged Alesh to a spar. Alesh immediately took his stance. Gray's first priority was to evaluate Alesh's current strength. Someday, the Dark Lord would appear. The only thing Gray could do for Alesh, who was fated to fight against such an enemy, was pass on as many of the skills he had learned as an adventurer as Alesh could absorb. As they fought, Gray observed that Alesh possessed remarkable speed and sharpness that were difficult to believe for someone who had only taken up the sword 3 months earlier. However, Alesh's movements were too linear, and his strikes lacked weight. Gray believed it might stem from a reluctance to hurt his opponent. He inwardly felt sorry for Alesh, but he knew Alesh needed to overcome it. When Alesh's weapon slipped from his grasp, Gray decided that was enough. Unbeknownst to either of them, Isoka had been watching the spar through the window. Gray told Alesh that the next day they would visit the Adventurers Guild to register him and accept a few quests. He also instructed Alesh to go straight to bed after dinner. Alesh agreed. Alesh then asked whether Gray was a B-rank adventurer. Gray explained that he was B+, and wondered why Alesh had asked. Alesh wanted to know if all B-rank adventurers were as strong as Gray. Gray recalled his fight with the bishop and also thought of Gansus before concluding that it varied. Aless revealed that Londi had often forced him into mock battles at the training grounds to test his abilities. He had never been able to hold his own and always ended up losing. Londi would laugh as he beat Aless, stepped on him, and spat on him. Every time Aless lost, Londi blamed him for being weak. Aless had continued wondering why he had been taken away from the people he cared about only to be placed in such a situation. Gray became convinced once again that killing that sex offender had been the right decision. Aless asked whether becoming an adventurer would allow him to become strong as well, and whether becoming strong would let him be with Mia and the others again. Gray found the question difficult to answer. Aless would undoubtedly become strong, just as expected of a hero. He might even surpass Gray in the not-too-distant future. Whether Aless could be reunited with his friends, however, depended on the information the broker was gathering. If the orphanage in Kodarl still existed, then everything would be fine. If it did not, the orphans could still be found even if they had been sold into slavery, and Gray could simply kill all of their owners. In the end, anything he said now would only be consolation. Even so, he chose to assure Aless that he could, and told him that, for the time being, he should focus on becoming stronger. Aless looked at Gray and nodded. Gray knew that his answer had not been because Aless was the hero, but for Aless's own sake. Aless decided to clean himself up before dinner and thanked Gray for sparring with him. Gray acknowledged it, but as he was about to head inside, he noticed Isoka. He asked what Isoka was doing there. Isoka, struggling to get the words out, mentioned that he was supposed to train with Fio the next day. Gray immediately realized the situation. He explained that he would be out on a quest with Aless until evening the following day and planned to train Aless until dinner after they returned. Isoka's voice became dejected. Gray closed his eyes. Even though Isoka was understanding, seeing his son's disappointed expression was difficult. He then promised that he would train Isoka and Fio after dinner the next day, so Isoka would need to take a bath before bed. Isoka immediately brightened and happily agreed. Gray needed to train Aless during the limited time they had together, but that was no excuse to neglect the other children. He then told Isoka that it was time to head in for dinner. Isoka excitedly revealed that he had helped make dinner that night. Hearing that, Gray remarked that he could not wait. He then ruffled Isoka's hair, causing Isoka to giggle. Isoka asked whether Gray had washed his hands. Gray realized that he had not and apologized. Even so, he had already patted Isoka's head with his dirty hand. At the dinner table, Ariamel noticed sand in Isoka's hair. Isoka was surprised that some was still there. Gray admitted that he had patted Isoka's head with dirty hands. Ariamel scolded him. Nina then wanted Gray to pat her head as well, but Ariamel refused. Gray explained that he had already washed his hands, prompting Ariamel to question whether he really had. At the beginning of Chapter 13, Ariamel knew that Lutz had wet himself during the night. Gray realized he had failed to hide it. Ariamel asked if it would be all right for her to sleep in the room with them for a while because she was concerned about helping the children with their nighttime trips to the toilet. Gray agreed as long as she was comfortable with it. He wondered if using physical enhancement magic to carry the children to the toilet would help, but Ariamel rejected the idea because it would only increase the burden on him. She then went into the room. Aless, who had just come upstairs, saw the scene and came to the wrong conclusion. The next morning, Ariamel asked Gray to hand her a tomato. Gray passed it to her and she thanked him. When he turned around, he found Aless staring at them. Gray greeted him good morning, and Ariamel did the same. Aless awkwardly returned the greeting. Gray and Ariamel both wondered why he was acting that way. Gray told him breakfast was almost ready and that he should go wash his face. Aless hurriedly agreed and rushed off. Ariamel wondered what that had been about, while Gray could only mutter that he had no idea. Fio entered and greeted Gray and Ariamel with a good morning. She mentioned that Aless had just run past her in a great hurry and asked if something had happened. Gray replied that nothing had happened and that Aless had simply come downstairs while they were making breakfast. Fio then asked whether Ariamel had slept in Gray's room the previous night. Ariamel confirmed that she had because she thought it would be best for the time being to help Nina and the others with their nighttime trips to the toilet. Fio immediately realized that Aless had definitely misunderstood the situation. She then turned to Gray and Ariamel and said she would go wake up Isoka. Gray wondered what was going on that morning, but Ariamel could only say she did not know. Gray and Ariamel returned to preparing breakfast. They could hear Fio and Isoka bustling around upstairs while the younger children, still half asleep, wandered downstairs. There was a small commotion as everyone washed their faces. It was an eventful morning, but having everyone gathered around the table for breakfast felt wonderful. Isoka was being scolded by Fio. Ariamel wiped Nina's face clean. Stella quietly slipped the food she disliked onto Lutz's plate. Back when Gray had lived alone, there had been many mornings when he skipped breakfast. Now, the morning no longer felt complete without this lively commotion. Gray looked at Aless and called out to him. Aless responded immediately. Gray told him that after breakfast they would wash the dishes together. As long as Aless was living there, he would take part in the family's chores. Aless quietly observed the family. Nina proudly declared that, as the big sister, she would help as well. Gray inwardly praised her. Nina, Stella, and Lutz were all good at carrying dishes, so they could rely on them. Stella confidently showed that they could leave it to them, while Isoka and Fio nodded in agreement. Ariamel then decided that she would clean everything up afterward and begin preparing lunches for Gray and Aless. Aless flusteredly agreed. Later, Gray and Aless were sent off with wishes for a good day. As they walked outside, Gray suggested registering Aless as an adventurer under a false name since there might be a manhunt for the hero. Aless wondered whether registering under a fake name was allowed. Gray explained that other adventurers did it as well, but once registered, the name could never be changed. It would stay with Aless throughout his entire adventuring career, so he should think carefully before deciding. Aless understood. Gray bought Aless a short sword at the weapon shop. The sword Aless had been using previously would have been sufficient, but Gray planned to give it to Isoka instead. When they arrived at their destination, Gray announced that they were there. Aless looked up at the Adventurers Guild. Gray told him they could go inside. He wanted to get Aless registered and finish a few quests as quickly as possible that day. Gray instructed Aless to get in line for registration while he checked the quest board. Aless was to join him once he had finished. Gray then walked toward the quest board. He wanted Aless to build up some achievements while they were together. Aless was probably already capable of defeating a hobgoblin or an orc on his own. Gray also wanted him to experience fighting multiple enemies by himself. However, Aless would be starting at E-rank. Forming a party would be ideal, but no one would suddenly invite a rookie E-rank adventurer. Anyone who did would likely have ulterior motives. As long as Gray was around, he would never allow that. A pack of wolves would have been the perfect group of monsters for Aless to face, but wolves possessed strong survival instincts and would avoid anyone stronger than themselves. If Gray accompanied Aless, they would simply stay away. Gray began to wonder if he was actually the one getting in Aless's way. Aless called out to Gray and told him he had finished registering. After looking at Aless's adventure ID, Gray realized that he had not changed his name. Aless explained that his name was the only thing his parents had left him. He did not even know what their faces looked like. Hearing that, Gray understood. He then decided that, for a start, they would take the ever-present goblin extermination quest. Gray asked Aless whether he had experience fighting goblins. Aless replied that he had fought them many times on the journey and had also fought orcs. Gray decided there was no need to go into the details, and the two lined up at the reception desk. While they were waiting, Gray heard someone question why he had brought a kid with him. It was Ganzus, who mocked Gray by suggesting that the lonely Gray had become so desperate for party members that he had tricked a rookie into joining him. Gray asked what it looked like and pointed out that he was obviously training a rookie. He added that, as usual, Ganzus's eyes, ears, and mouth were nothing but knotholes. Ganzus twitched. Gray continued by mocking a certain self-proclaimed B-rank party leader, whose level was so low that he had nearly collapsed from seeing nothing more than an elder orc's head. He remarked that, at this rate, it could lower the quality of adventurers as a whole, leaving him with no choice but to take action. Ganzus grabbed Gray while shouting in frustration. The members of Ganzus's party told their leader to stop fooling around because they had been preparing for their quest for days. Ganzus reluctantly acknowledged them and let go of Gray. Aless asked who that had been. Gray explained that Ganzus simply craved attention and picked a fight with him every time they met. Even so, Gray noticed that Ganzus had been carrying a quest form for an elder orc. He wondered whether Ganzus had really come just to tell him about his first elder orc extermination. When it was Gray's turn at the counter, Sasha recognized the new rookie as someone acquainted with Gray. Gray confirmed that he was responsible for Alessa's training for the time being. Sasha remarked that, with Gray accompanying him, an extermination quest posed nothing to worry about. She approved the quest and wished them luck. Gray acknowledged it. Later, they arrived at the quest location on the outskirts of Basto. Gray told Aless to stop and they hid behind a bush. 3 goblins were visible ahead. Aless noticed that the goblins were heading toward Basto. Gray praised his keen eye. He instructed Aless to wait until they came closer to the tree, then kill them swiftly before they could fight back or call for help. Aless nodded. As the 3 goblins advanced, Aless sprang from the bushes. The goblins attacked, but Aless quickly defeated them. He then asked Gray how he had done. Gray saw no particular issues. Compared to their training the previous day, Alessa's movements had changed for the better. Unlike when facing a human opponent, Aless showed no hesitation when swinging his sword at goblins. Aless remarked that Gray had been amazing even during practice. Whenever he thought about the possibility of hurting another person, it frightened him, yet he felt nothing when fighting monsters. Gray understood that fighting humans was completely different from fighting monsters. Still, Aless would eventually need experience for the day he encountered humans he would have to cut down. Gray briefly wondered whether there were any suitable bandits nearby. Gray then told Aless they would continue. The goblins they had defeated were probably scouts sent ahead to human towns and villages to determine whether they could be attacked. Aless reasoned that goblins would never attack a town the size of Bastok, so perhaps it would have been fine to leave them alone. Gray rejected that idea. Once goblins had laid eyes on Bastok, they might as well have already marked its children as targets. Goblins were scum that had to be killed. Aless looked at Gray. Gray reaffirmed that they had to kill them and told Aless they would continue. Before long, they spotted another group of goblins. Aless noticed their numbers immediately and remarked that there seemed to be quite a lot of them. Looking at what stood before them, Gray counted 1 goblin general, 2 goblin warriors, 4 hobgoblins, and around 50 regular goblins. He decided that he would fight 2 opponents. He would take down the self-important-looking goblin general, the 2 attendants at its sides, and 2 of the hobgoblins. He then asked whether Aless could handle the rest. Aless was taken aback by the number. Gray explained that he would cast physical enhancement on him this time. Gray would begin by drawing their attention while Aless thinned their numbers from the rear. Since many goblins fled once they realized they could not win, Aless acknowledged the plan. Aless assumed they would let the goblins run away to reduce the number they had to fight. Gray immediately rejected that idea. Aless was not to let a single goblin escape. Before Aless could respond, Gray declared that they were moving. Aless tried to stop him, but Gray had already advanced. Ahead, the goblins were making a noisy commotion. The goblin general turned its gaze toward Gray. Gray remarked that he had thought he smelled the stench of goblins and invited them to come at him. The regular goblins charged, while the stronger monsters remained where they were. The goblin general sneered. Meanwhile, Aless slipped behind the regular goblins and moved into position. 1 goblin warrior let out a roar and lunged at Gray. Gray caught its weapon, yanked it away, remarked that it was too slow, and cut off its head. The second goblin warrior attacked next. Gray blocked its strike with his palm before slicing off its arms and cutting through its neck. Witnessing this, the regular goblins began to panic. Gray noticed that, despite watching numerous subordinates die, the goblin general held no resentment toward him. Instead, it appeared delighted. Gray observed that it truly wore the face of a warrior. These goblins had slaughtered countless humans as well. Gray answered its expression with a devilish grin. To him, goblins that multiplied and murdered humans held no value. The regular goblins suddenly fell into complete chaos. One of them was cut down, spraying blood over another. Aless had begun his assault. He cut down 1 goblin after another in rapid succession. He was amazed by the effectiveness of Gray's physical enhancement magic as he continued killing them. It was unfortunate that he could not watch Gray's battle, but he could not allow any goblin to escape. As Aless weaved through the battlefield in a zigzag pattern, he thought that, if he fought like this against knights, he would probably be branded a craven, a coward, or a bastard. It did not matter to him. Concepts such as fair play or noble combat meant nothing. The remaining regular goblins were thrown into panic. Gray had already killed both goblin warriors. Even after Gray chopped off one of the goblin general's arms, it still looked exhilarated. Gray found it bizarre. When the hobgoblins moved in, he decided to leave them to Aless. Although Aless had almost no practical combat experience, he was undeniably talented. Gray judged that only a few days of training would be enough. A surviving regular goblin suddenly attacked, and Gray immediately cut it down. After the battle, Gray instructed Aless to go around and collect the monster's equipment. Aless acknowledged him. He was then shocked by what Gray started doing. Gray explained that he intended to remove the goblin general's testicles. Although they were not worth as much as an elder orc's, they still sold for a high price. He wanted Aless to remember that. Aless was thoroughly disgusted. His eyes widened as Gray began cutting them off. Unable to keep watching, Aless turned away. He could not bear the sight, though he was fairly certain one had already come off. When he heard a snapping sound, he covered his entire face. At the beginning of Chapter 14, Gray carried the head of a goblin general, snickering to himself about it being a souvenir. Aless looked at him, wondering who it was meant for. Soon after, another pair of goblins fell to their blades. Gray asked whether Aless had collected the goblin ears. Aless confirmed that he had just finished gathering them. Gray said that was good and instructed Aless to report to the Adventurers Guild that he had killed all of them. Gray imagined Sasha concluding that he was a brute who had thrown a brand new adventurer into a pack of goblins. That would be a problem. Then he realized it would only be a problem because it was exactly what he had done. He immediately changed his mind, telling Aless that he would handle the report himself. He apologized to Aless, who accepted despite his confusion. Gray handed Aless a few coins. Expecting Sasha to give him a thorough scolding, he told Aless to spend some time at the guild's bar with a glass of milk while he dealt with the report. Aless remained puzzled but agreed. Back at the guild, Sasha narrowed her eyes and accused Gray of throwing a rookie into a pack of goblins, calling him a brute. She also pointed out that Gray was giving all the credit to Aless, earning him a promotion on his very first day as an adventurer. The situation looked highly suspicious. Gray remarked that Sasha seemed doubtful, but Aless had truly killed most of the goblins. Sasha inspected the bags and pulled out part of a monster's remains before asking whether Aless had even killed a goblin warrior. Gray offered no reply. Sasha decided that the goblin warrior kill would instead be added to Gray's assessment, although Aless would rank up regardless. Gray dismissed the idea, saying it was meaningless to include it in his assessment. Sasha agreed and asked whether he intended to take the examination this time. Gray answered that he had no interest. Afterward, Gray found Aless being approached by two female adventurers. One asked whether Aless would like to form a party with them. The other, noticing he was a rookie, explained that they were D-rank adventurers and could take him on all sorts of quests. Aless looked troubled. Gray decided he should help. Aless noticed him and silently pleaded for assistance. Gray could not help thinking that Aless had shown far more spirit while fighting goblins. He walked over, apologized for keeping Aless waiting, and said it was time to head home. Aless happily agreed. The two women were shocked to discover that Aless was with Gray. Not wanting any involvement, they hurried away. Watching them leave, Gray quietly muttered that perhaps he should have stayed out of it. As Gray and Aless approached the house, they found Emilia standing in front of the door, complaining to herself that Kasha had been cruel for suddenly making her deliver a souvenir. She wondered what she was even supposed to say and practiced to herself, unaware that Gray and Aless could hear everything. She was horrified when Gray spoke from behind her and asked what she was doing. Emilia became completely flustered, clearly startled to find Gray standing there. Gray accepted the situation, though he privately thought that what she had been saying was hardly appropriate while standing on someone else's doorstep. Valkyrie was an adventuring party whose fame had spread even to the capital. The group of beauties was on the verge of reaching S-rank and had even cleared the garden, a place that apparently attracted the attention of royalty. Gray wondered what Valkyrie's admirers would think if they saw their leader, Emilia, acting so suspiciously. After clearing her throat, Emilia asked whether Aless was the one Gray had mentioned. Gray confirmed it and introduced Aless, explaining that he was simply another victim of Storia. Emilia understood. She introduced herself as Emilia, an adventurer based in the town. Aless recognized her as a member of Valkyrie and introduced himself as a new adventurer in town. Emilia told him that if there was anything he did not understand, he was welcome to ask, though she admitted it was probably unnecessary with Gray around. Aless bowed and thanked her. Gray remarked that they should not continue standing outside and invited them in as he opened the door. Inside, Ariamel admitted that she had been listening and welcomed Gray home. She quickly added that she had not intended to eavesdrop and tried to explain herself. Gray realized that, with Emilia behaving so suspiciously outside, Ariamel had probably been unsure whether she should greet her. He told Ariamel that he understood and asked her to prepare tea for their guest. Ariamel agreed and took Gray's lunchbox before quickly walking away. Gray suddenly realized she had not taken Aless's lunchbox. Once inside, Emilia greeted the children. Theo noticed that Kasha had not come with her that day. Emilia explained that Kasha had received some advice from the other members and was occupied with something else. She then remembered the reason for her visit and presented the souvenir, suggesting they all enjoy it together with the children. Gray thanked her and suggested they eat it once Ariamel brought the tea. He invited Emilia to join them, and she happily accepted. Gray offered to fetch plates. Inwardly, Emilia was delighted that Gray seemed happy. Ariamel soon returned and announced that the tea was ready. Gray mentioned that Emilia had brought cake and said he would get plates and forks. Ariamel stopped him, explaining that she had already gathered the dishes because she had been preparing snacks, and that she had brewed plenty of tea so there would be enough for refills. Watching Ariamel handle everything so smoothly, Emilia could only think that Ariamel was formidable. Emilia insisted that they let her help with something. Ariamel refused, reminding her that she was a guest and asking her to have a seat instead. Gray merely scratched his head. He then called everyone over to the sofa because they were about to have cake. Nina immediately ran over with Stella, while Lutz clung to Gray. Theo decided to help Ariamel and Isoka volunteered to help Aless. Emilia continued insisting on helping, while Ariamel remained firm that it would not be right to ask a guest to do so. Watching the exchange, Gray felt that Emilia had been acting somewhat strangely ever since returning from their expedition. Just as Emilia was about to insist once more, the three little children stared at her. Nina and Stella took her by the hands and sat her down on the sofa before running over to where Gray was sitting. Emilia admitted that, for a moment, she had thought the children had accepted her offer to help. Gray explained that they were simply happy to have her there. Emilia shyly accepted the thought. After bringing the plates, Ariamel announced that it was time for cake, prompting the children to rush over. Aless, Isoka, and Theo sat together. Lutz and Nina happily enjoyed their cake, while Stella quietly munched on hers. Emilia watched as Gray wiped Nina's face and asked whether the cake was good. Nina happily nodded, and Gray agreed that it was. Gray then looked at Emilia and found her smiling at him. She giggled, saying that she had been thinking Gray truly had become a father. Gray took note of the word truly. Emilia quickly clarified that she did not mean it in a bad way or that it was surprising or unfitting. On the contrary, she had never seen him more in his element. Gray understood. The three toddlers soon gathered around Gray, asking for more cake. Gray did not mind sharing his portion and glanced at Ariamel. Ariamel agreed, but only this once, making the children happy. She divided the extra cake in half and gave a piece to Stella. Emilia handed a piece to Nina, while Gray gave one to Lutz, reminding him that dinner was still ahead. Isoka also wanted another piece. Theo asked for more as well and ended up eating Isoka's share. Aless offered Isoka his own portion, but Isoka hurriedly refused and insisted that Aless should not worry about it. Emilia asked Nina, who was sitting in front of her. Nina babbled her thanks to Emilia, who was immediately overwhelmed by her cuteness. Emilia warmly accepted Nina's gratitude. Watching the scene, Gray had never expected Nina to bring down even the strongest adventurer in Bastoke. He silently praised her. After that, Emilia helped with preparing dinner. She also spent time playing with the children, and they all seemed to get along very well. She proved to be terrible at cards, repeatedly drawing the joker. Before long, it was almost bath time and it had grown late. Gray asked Emilia if she would like to stay. Emilia's face instantly turned red as she repeated his words. Flustered, she declined, saying that she needed to go home. However, Stella asked her not to leave, and Nina clung to her while babbling that she wanted to play more. The children's affection struck Emilia like Cupid's arrow. As Theo continued holding the cards during the game, Emilia changed her mind and decided to stay. At the beginning of Chapter 15, Ariamel informed Emilia that the bath was ready and that she could go ahead. Emilia said she was fine with going last. Gray pointed out that the water would cool down and that it took a while for all the kids to bathe. Emilia insisted that she was fine and that they should not worry about it. Gray accepted her decision. By the time the bath was ready, Nina was already nodding off to sleep. Gray told her that if she was sleepy, she did not need to push herself and asked if she wanted to go to bed. However, Nina was looking for Emilia before eventually falling asleep. Gray remarked that there was no helping it, and Ariamel agreed. Emilia came out of the bath wearing her nightgown. Aless suddenly ran off after wishing everyone good night. Emilia noticed that everyone was still there and thanked them for letting her use their bath. She also thanked Ariamel for lending her the pajamas and admitted that it was a little embarrassing with everyone staring at her. Gray looked away and apologized. Ariamel praised Emilia for being so pretty, leaving Emilia flustered. Gray remembered that whenever Emilia had been complimented on her appearance before, she had either ignored it or simply acknowledged it. He had never seen her look so happy about being praised. He also recalled the time Emilia had worn a red dress and blushed to match it after he complimented her, becoming noticeably shy. Noticing Gray spacing out, Emilia asked what was wrong, mentioning that he did not usually lose focus like that. Gray dismissed it and said it was about time they put the kids to bed. Ariamel agreed and said she would carry Stella. Gray said he would take Lutz and Nina. Emilia shyly asked if she could carry Nina to bed instead. Ariamel gladly agreed and Gray did as well. Emilia carried Nina, and Gray noticed that Emilia had completely fallen for her. When they arrived at the bedroom, Emilia observed that the little ones always slept with Gray. Gray explained that it was to help them go to the potty during the night. Ariamel then mentioned that she was thinking of sleeping in her room that night with Emilia and Nina. Gray said that if Emilia did not mind, that would be fine. Emilia replied that she did not mind at all. Emilia found herself thinking about Ariamel's emphasis on the word, tonight, realizing that Ariamel had made a point of saying it. Ariamel led Emilia to her room and Emilia followed. Before entering, she glanced back at Gray. When Gray asked what was wrong, Emilia smiled and wished him good night. Gray wished her good night in return. The next morning, Gray got out of bed and adjusted Lutz's blanket. When he entered the kitchen, he found Ariamel and Emilia already there. Emilia greeted him good morning and asked if he had overslept. Gray replied that sleeping beside the little ones was so warm that he could not help it. He offered to help and asked what he should do. Ariamel asked him to cut the vegetables. Emilia said that if it was only cutting, she could do it instead. Gray remarked that swords were the only blades Emilia could properly handle. Emilia pouted and decided to set the table instead. Gray told Ariamel that Emilia had once chopped a cutting board in half with a kitchen knife, leaving Ariamel shocked. His attention then shifted to the table, where he noticed several lunchboxes and asked if they were for later. Ariamel confirmed that they were and mentioned that she had made one for Emilia as well. Gray quietly realized that Ariamel had gotten up very early to prepare them. He remembered telling Lutz that he would not be taking a job that day and that they would all be eating out. Recalling another time he had said he did not need a lunchbox, Gray apologized for it. Ariamel replied that it was fine since she also considered reducing waste. Gray thanked Ariamel and said he was always grateful to her. Ariamel smiled and said that she was grateful to Gray as well, just like everyone else. Ariamel handed lunchboxes to Gray, Aless, and Emilia. Emilia was surprised that Ariamel had found the time to prepare lunch, especially since she had made one for her as well. Nina asked Emilia to come again, Stella said goodbye, and Lutz pouted. Emilia promised that they would play together again. She thanked Ariamel for taking care of her, and even sending her off with a lunchbox. Ariamel replied that it was nothing, adding that she had enjoyed herself too and hoped Emilia would tell her more stories another time. Gray wondered why Emilia suddenly looked so uncomfortable. Aless had also seemed a little off, and Gray thought it might be a good idea to talk with each of them separately. As they walked outside, Emilia commented that they had a wonderful family. Gray agreed. Emilia added that, for the first time in a long while, she had found herself missing her parents and sisters, although she doubted they had any interest in her. Gray thought that was probably a good thing. He recalled that Emilia's father was a noble from a certain land. As the third daughter, she had been arranged for a political marriage, but she refused and ran away from home. Kasia had been her friend since birth, and was closer to her than her own sisters. Apparently, Emilia had run away together with Kasia as though it had been the most natural decision. Emilia said that she would be taking her leave and apologized for suddenly showing up the previous night. Gray assured her that it had been no problem at all and encouraged her to visit again anytime, knowing the children would be delighted. Emilia waved goodbye to Gray and Aless, saying that she would see them later at the guild. After Emilia left, Gray turned to Aless and said they should get going. Noticing something was bothering him, Gray asked what was wrong. Aless awkwardly asked what kind of relationship Gray and Emilia had. Gray wondered why everyone seemed so interested in that sort of thing. Meanwhile, Aless found himself wondering whether it could be something like polygamy, considering there was Emilia and also Ariamel. Since it was Gray, he could not help thinking it might actually be possible. About 8 years ago, near Bastoke, a wagon carrying children was spotted by a group of men hiding nearby. They attacked the wagon without caring whether the occupants were travelers or guards, believing that stagecoaches at that time of year had little protection. As they approached, one girl called for her older sister while another child shoved a boy and urged him to run. Ignoring the men's attempts to stop him, the boy fled toward the forest. At the Bastoke Adventurers Guild, Sasha welcomed a visitor to the branch. The limping boy entered the guild, and Sasha crouched before him to ask what had happened. The boy's eyes widened before he explained that he had been told someone at the guild could help him. Through tears, he revealed that brigands had captured his older sister along with his mother and father, who had told him to escape on his own. Sasha patiently encouraged him to continue. The boy explained that they had boarded the wagon to attend the festival, but brigands had attacked and captured many people, including his family and everyone else from his village. Desperately, he begged for help as his sobs grew louder. Sasha could only imagine how terrifying the experience had been. That day marked the beginning of Bastoke's annual festival. Lasting 3 days, it featured shop stalls, parades, and many other festivities that attracted visitors from nearby villages. The increase in travelers also brought those who preyed upon them, including brigands, fraudsters, and kidnappers. Festival season was just as profitable for criminals as it was for merchants. Although security throughout Bastoke was strengthened during the event, areas farther from the city remained beyond its protection. The boy had been fortunate to reach the guild at all. The boy declared that he wished to make a request and opened his hand to reveal several coins. The receptionists were left speechless, uncertain whether they should accept it as a quest. Sasha realized that if someone did not act soon, it would already be too late. She clenched her teeth, knowing that even adventurers would be risking their lives. She wondered whether anyone would confront an entire band of brigands for only a handful of copper coins, even to save innocent lives. Although she knew she was not supposed to, she considered adding her own money to increase the reward. At that moment, Gray entered the guild with a grumpy expression and noticed the situation. After Sasha explained everything, Gray questioned why the quest had not already been accepted, reminding everyone that there was no minimum reward required for a quest. His expression turned grim as he ordered them to hurry and prepare the quest document. The guild immediately sprang into action. Gray then studied the frightened boy, who flinched under his gaze. After a brief silence, Gray confirmed that the boy had come all the way to the Adventurers Guild because he wanted someone to save his family. The boy nodded. Gray then confirmed that the adult who had brought the boy to the guild had gone to the plaza for business. Satisfied with the answer, Gray acknowledged it. Sasha wondered whether Gray intended to accept the quest. Gray readily decided to take it, amused by the prospect of facing what sounded like a fairly large band of brigands. He even remarked to himself that they were likely sitting on a considerable amount of loot. Sasha questioned whether he was certain, pointing out that Gray was not part of a party and wondering if he intended to go alone. Gray regarded it as obvious, believing that being solo was precisely why he could take on a quest like this. Inwardly, he recalled that his party had only recently disbanded. Sasha accepted his decision, and the quest was officially registered. Gray acknowledged the completed acceptance before walking away. As he headed outside, he fixed the boy with a hard stare, silently assuring him that the quest would be completed without fail and that he only needed to wait patiently. The boy could only watch Gray leave the guild. Meanwhile, at the brigands' hideout, the captives remained restrained. A bearded man laughed over how profitable the day's haul had been, pleased that the wagon had been filled with people and convinced that nothing surpassed festival season. A masked man agreed, noting that the only injury on their side had been suffered by a fool who had tripped while chasing the child who escaped. When another brigand questioned whether allowing the boy to get away was a problem, the bearded man dismissed the concern, doubting that a child could accomplish anything, even if he tried to hire adventurers for revenge. Nearby, a hooded man cursed the injury he had suffered because of the escaped boy. Determined to vent his anger on the boy's family, he ignored the fact that the captives were meant to remain unharmed as merchandise. He intended to spare neither the young daughter nor the mother despite their value. As he approached the entrance, a heavy thud echoed through the hideout. Annoyed, he assumed a guard had dropped something and prepared to scold the lookout for making noise. Instead, he was met with the horrifying sight of the lookout's severed head rolling across the ground. Before he could react, a blade rested against his neck. Gray stood before him, having already determined that these were the brigands responsible for attacking the stagecoach earlier that day. The hooded man grew visibly nervous. Gray had no interest in hearing an explanation. Regardless of the man's answer, Gray had already decided that he would kill him. At the beginning of Chapter 16, 6 days had passed since Aless became an adventurer. During that time, he had taken on a wide variety of quests involving goblins, treants, orcs, bandits, and criminals. Many of the quests were beyond what would normally be considered appropriate for Aless's rank. It was also common for stronger monsters to appear unexpectedly at the quest destinations. Gray merely chuckled whenever it happened, while Sasha responded with an exasperated expression each time. Aless gradually became accustomed to fighting human opponents, overcoming the anxiety he had initially felt. Even so, he still found battling people more difficult than fighting monsters. Along the way, Gray taught Aless how to distinguish medicinal herbs and identify valuable monster materials. Such knowledge was essential for adventurers, providing a reliable way to earn enough for daily expenses. Aless was not the only one making progress. Isoka had overcome his habit of closing his eyes whenever he swung his sword and now paid close attention to his opponent's movements. The previous night had also marked an important milestone, as Fio finally succeeded in manifesting magic. While looking at the small flame she had produced, Fio was dissatisfied with the result and felt that her mental image was still lacking. Privately, however, Gray had never expected her to improve so much in such a short time. Although he was happy with everyone's progress, he also found it difficult knowing that each improvement brought them one step closer to becoming full-fledged adventurers. At that moment, Aless was giving Sasha a report about the orc they had unexpectedly encountered and defeated. Sasha could only sigh before acknowledging the report, then glared at Gray, who deliberately looked away. Gray told Aless that they should head home, and Aless agreed. Just then, Ganzus called out to Gray and questioned whether Aless would really improve by doing nothing but minor jobs like goblin extermination. With a smug expression, Ganzus boasted that his own group had just returned from slaying an elder orc. Gray asked if Ganzus had finally lost his elder orc slaying virginity before declaring that he had a new goal for him to pursue. Gray then tossed over the head of a goblin general. Ganzus caught it, causing a commotion throughout the guild. As Gray watched the reaction, he casually thought that perhaps next time he would bring Ganzus the head of a manticore instead. After leaving the guild, Gray noticed a flock of doves. Remembering that he had other business to attend to, he told Aless to head home first. Aless hesitantly agreed. Gray then went to meet the broker. The broker apologized for making him wait, explaining that the matter had taken longer than expected. Gray quietly thought that this might mark the end of Aless's stay with them before telling the broker it was fine and asking for the report. The broker began by informing Gray that the orphanage in Kodarl no longer existed. Its former location had been replaced by a new store belonging to the filler company. Gray asked about the company, prompting the broker to wonder whether he was interested in it. Gray recalled that the company consisted of several of the country's wealthy merchants. He had also heard that the company's president and his wife had died in an accident several years earlier, after which a relative had apparently taken over. Gray did not know the details and quietly wondered whether it had truly been an accident. He concluded that it was not unusual for a company to establish a branch in another country and that it was not important at the moment. Gray instead asked about the children who had lived in the orphanage. The broker informed him that they were all alive in Storia as slaves. Gray felt relieved that it had not been the worst possible outcome. He then asked whether slavery was not illegal in Storia. The broker explained that it was officially illegal, but nobles and certain members of the clergy still kept slaves in secret. Gray clicked his tongue and immediately asked where he could find the human filth responsible for enslaving the children. The broker remarked that Gray's bloodlust was beginning to leak out before revealing that the slave merchant's name was Xanus. Although Xanus presented himself as an ordinary merchant, he secretly supplied illegal goods to nobles and clergy in exchange for various favors and protections. Gray committed the name to memory. The broker added that Xanis appeared to be preparing to flee the country. Wondering why someone in Xanis's position would do so, Gray asked for the reason. The broker informed him that a coup d'état had occurred in Storia. Gray asked the broker about the coup d'état. Storia was supposed to have the Holy Knights, whose strength was said to surpass that of ordinary knights even if several fought together. Gray himself had once fought one of them, a man named Londi or something similar. If there were more knights of that caliber, he found it difficult to imagine a coup succeeding. He asked where the Holy Knights had been. The broker explained that the leader of the Holy Knights, Lysen, along with more than half of the order, had been behind the coup. They had waited until Storia's important figures were gathered before the very Holy Knights assigned as their bodyguards turned their swords on them and seized control of the cathedral. The entire takeover had been over almost instantly. Gray remarked that the broker spoke as though he had witnessed it personally. The broker merely chuckled, leaving the question unanswered. The broker went on to explain that merchants connected to the executed upper echelon were also being targeted for execution. Gray understood and concluded that the slave merchant, Xanis, now feared for his own life. Uninterested in the political situation in Storia, Gray instead demanded an update on Xanis's current whereabouts. The broker informed him that Xanis was traveling toward another country with all of his possessions. Gray asked whether the children were included among those possessions, noting the convenient coincidence. The broker confirmed that the children were Xanis's greatest concern because the hero's family served as a valuable trump card. Gray realized that the coup had something to do with the hero, and the broker agreed that it was likely one of the reasons, as it provided a convincing justification. Gray briefly considered waiting but immediately dismissed the idea. Since Xanis was coming all the way to town, Gray decided it would be improper not to greet him personally. The broker asked whether the report had met Gray's expectations. Gray confirmed that it had and handed over the agreed payment. After thanking him and expressing his hope for future business, the broker started to leave. Gray stopped him, saying there was one more matter he wanted investigated. He considered the information he already had. 3 wagons, Xanis's servants and bodyguards numbering 12 in total, along with 5 children. It was a rather large procession for someone fleeing the country, and Gray already knew the route they intended to take. The broker warned that he could not guarantee responsibility if Xanis changed course. Gray reflected that the additional information had cost him another 50 gold. It was expensive, but ensuring the children's rescue made it worthwhile. Since Xanis was transporting all of his belongings, Gray expected to recover his losses afterward. Gray then headed to Valkyrie's party house. Halsaria was surprised by his unexpected visit. Gray apologized for arriving without notice and explained that he needed something. Halsaria assured him it was fine and directed him to the conference room before quickly informing Kasha that Gray had arrived. When Kasha and Emilia appeared, Gray requested to borrow a wagon. Halsaria remarked that, from any perspective, Gray would look like a bandit attacking a merchant. Gray questioned whether that was really the case, while Kasha quietly admitted that he could not exactly deny it. Emilia smiled and commented that it seemed very much like something Gray would do, so she had no objection. After clearing her throat, Emilia informed Gray that a wagon would be prepared for him by the following morning and asked him to wait until then. Gray sincerely thanked her for the assistance, acknowledging that she had been helping him a great deal lately. He expressed his gratitude and told her that if she ever needed anything, she only had to ask. Emilia replied that she supposed she would take him up on that. Smiling, she quietly giggled as she thought about what to request. Gray asked her to go easy on him, leaving both Kasha and Halsaria visibly surprised. As the 3 women walked away, Kasha asked Emilia whether things had gone well the other day after all. She even wondered whether Emilia and Gray had shared a kiss that morning. Emilia immediately denied it once again, insisting that it was not like that. Halsaria told Emilia that she should be grateful for Kasha's meddling. On his way home, Gray reflected on the news that the children from the orphanage were still alive. Although he could have taken Aless with him to deal with Xanis, doing so would risk pursuers from Storia discovering Alessa's whereabouts. Gray decided it would be best to handle everything himself. The only problem was that he would most likely be unable to return the following day. Setting those thoughts aside, he resolved to spend the rest of the day enjoying everyone's company as much as possible. Upon arriving home, he announced his return. Back then, a hero was someone who was strong and kind, possessing the indomitable will to overcome adversity and the courage to stand against any foe. It was an existence that everyone admired. Raised in a remote village, a 9-year-old boy named Gray dreamed of becoming a hero and aspired to become an adventurer. One day, Gray nervously faced a forest wolf, desperately trying to keep it away. Nearby, a passing adventurer noticed the situation and hid behind a tree while watching from a distance. At first, the man assumed the boy would be eaten. Saving him would not earn a single coin, and he still had to worry about making enough money for the day. Children falling prey to monsters was not unusual. When the wolf suddenly lunged, Gray instinctively raised his arms to protect himself. Before the attack could land, however, the adventurer stepped in and cut down the monster. Inwardly, the man cursed himself. It was a troublesome situation, but he could not simply stand by and watch a child die. Defeating a single forest wolf would not take long. Gray stood there in shock, breathing heavily. Moments later, several more wolves emerged. The adventurer immediately realized how unlucky the situation had become. Glancing back at Gray, he knew there was no turning back anymore and charged straight at the pack. Gray watched in astonishment as the adventurer cut down one wolf after another. With a loud battle cry, the man continued fighting until the remaining wolves finally fled. Breathing heavily, he remarked to himself that they had been saved before collapsing onto the ground. He muttered that it had been far too close for comfort. Incidents like this were exactly why he preferred sticking to the jobs he was used to, though selling the wolves' fangs at the guild should at least pay for his drinks that night. Gray cautiously approached him, surprising the adventurer, who had not expected the boy to still be there. The man told Gray to go home and warned that he would not save him again if he got attacked. Looking at the boy more closely, he privately thought that Gray had quite an evil-looking face. Gray thanked the adventurer with a deep bow before introducing himself and asking for the man's name. The adventurer introduced himself as Rand, a D-rank adventurer, and remarked that there was no need to remember his name since they would probably never meet again. With that, Rand immediately began collecting the wolves' fangs. That encounter became the moment Gray decided to become an adventurer. After being attacked by monsters and accepting his own death, a complete stranger had risked his life to protect him. The sight of Rand's back as he stood against the monsters remained etched into Gray's memory for the rest of his life. That was the kind of person Gray wanted to become. Rand staggered into the guild, unsteady from drink. The other adventurers whispered among themselves, noting that he was drinking again after taking nothing more than an easy job. They referred to him as the eternal D-rank adventurer and remarked that they did not want to end up like him. Meanwhile, Rand paid them no mind, thinking that he was not bothering anyone and that they should simply leave him alone. When Rand had been young, he had also dreamed of becoming a hero. He became an adventurer, only to discover that reality was far from kind. He endured betrayal, failed quests, and the deaths of friends. He had considered giving up countless times, but lacking any other skills, he could not imagine making a living any other way. As Rand sat drinking, someone called out to him. Turning around, he found Gray standing there, happy to see him. Rand recognized him as the little boy he had once rescued and remarked on how much he had grown. Gray explained that Rand had saved his life, and because of that he had begun learning swordsmanship, reading and writing from the people in his village so he could become an adventurer. Rand was surprised by his determination. Gray then asked if Rand had any free time because he wanted to hear about adventuring. Left momentarily speechless, Rand turned his back and grumbled that it was a pain. Noticing that Gray was in the middle of running errands, he told him to go home instead. Gray agreed. From then on, whenever Gray was out running errands, he sought out Rand to hear all kinds of stories about adventuring. Although Rand always acted as though it was troublesome, talking with Gray was never truly an ordeal. Having nowhere he really belonged, he found himself accepting the company of the boy who always sought him out. On the 28th day, Rand interrupted one of his stories to excuse himself to use the restroom, leaving Gray hanging in the middle of it. Gray complained that Rand drank too much, while Rand dismissed the remark before wobbling off toward the restroom. Left alone, Gray noticed that Rand always drank the cheapest liquor available. Curious, he examined the bottle and cautiously sniffed it, only to recoil and cover his nose. At that moment, another adventurer approached Gray. Having noticed how often Gray spoke with Rand, the adventurer asked what they talked about. Gray explained that he wanted to become an adventurer and that Rand had been teaching him many things. The adventurer smirked and advised Gray to stop following someone like the eternal D-rank adventurer, warning that no matter how talented Gray might be, he could end up stuck at D-rank as well. From a short distance away, Rand overheard the exchange. Gray calmly replied that he did not know how respected the other adventurer was, but Rand had saved his life from a monster despite receiving no reward for doing so. To Gray, Rand was the kind of adventurer he wanted to become. Rand was deeply moved. He never expected anyone to place so much importance on being rescued only once, though he privately thought Gray's intimidating glare toward the other adventurer was unnecessary. The adventurer clicked his tongue, claiming he had merely been offering friendly advice before telling Gray to do as he pleased. Rand let out a quiet sigh before returning. He apologized for taking so long and lied that the restroom had been crowded. Gray welcomed him back and remarked that he did not need to explain the details. Rand then asked whether Gray still had time that day and told him to come along. When Gray wondered where they were going, Rand decided to teach him how to find medicinal herbs and distinguish them from similar plants. He explained that if Gray could at least learn that much, he would always be able to scrape by as an adventurer. Gray eagerly agreed. After paying for his drink, Rand walked out, telling Gray to hurry after him. As they walked outside together, Rand found himself remembering the expressions on his parents' faces when he had first told them he wanted to become an adventurer. They had asked whether he would become a respectable adventurer and make them proud. Rand had confidently answered that he would, and both of them had wholeheartedly encouraged him. Not long after he became an adventurer, however, they passed away from illness. As a child, Rand had believed without question that he would become a great adventurer. Looking back, he wondered how he had become such a broken, defeated, and despondent man. Feeling that he could not face his parents in his current state, he looked up at the sky and decided that, although it might already be too late, he wanted to try one more time. Behind him, Gray silently watched. From that day onward, Rand worked hard and eventually reached C rank. However, during a later quest, he saved someone who was being attacked by a monster. The injuries he suffered while protecting that person ultimately claimed his life, and he was buried in the cemetery on the outskirts of the city. Every year thereafter, a bottle of the cheap liquor favored by a certain C-rank adventurer was left as an offering at his nameless gravestone. At the beginning of Chapter 17, Scrad, the fifth seat of Storia's Holy Knights, rode on horseback alongside Meyer, a Holy Knight squire. According to the information they had received from above, they would soon catch up with their target, Xanis. Scrad also informed Meyer that Xanis had apparently hired a wanted spear user as his bodyguard. Although they were interested in the magic item in Xanis's possession, Scrad cautioned Meyer not to let his guard down. Meyer confidently assured him that he could handle it. Looking at Meyer, Scrad felt that he still did not fully understand the situation. Meanwhile, Xanis's carriages continued racing toward the border. Xanis believed that they only needed to travel a little farther before crossing into another country, where Storia's pursuers would no longer be able to act so freely against him. Although the bodyguard he had hired was said to be highly capable, he remained uncertain how the man would fare against the Holy Knights. If Knight Commander Raisin or Deputy Commander Castor were to appear, however, Xanis knew it would be over. For years, Xanis had supplied perverted nobles with illegal goods. The sudden coup d'état had turned everything upside down. In the new Storia, those connected to the previous regime and the underworld were being arrested one after another. At that rate, Xanis himself would eventually be executed. He had no intention of allowing his life to end that way. The coup had been triggered by the disappearance of the bishop's party together with the prophesied hero. Unfortunately for Xanis, one of his regular clients had been involved. Even so, he still believed there was hope. The children who had once lived with the hero were currently in his possession. Anticipating a situation like this, he had made certain that no one laid a hand on them. Fortunately, Xanis also knew where the bishop's party had gone and why. He believed that a party accompanied by holy knights would not be defeated so easily. If he could only find the hero, he intended to use the children as bargaining chip. Suddenly, the lead carriage came to an abrupt stop. Xanis initially suspected that the holy knights had caught up with them. Looking outside, however, he saw only Gray standing in the road. One of the guards identified Gray as a bandit, but before he could finish speaking, Gray cut off his head with a single slash. As the guard's body collapsed to the ground, Gray rejected being mistaken for a bandit, considering himself an adventurer instead. Xanis stared in shock at the fallen guard. He briefly wondered whether Gray might have been a former high-ranking adventurer who had lost his credentials. Regardless, Xanis had hired an accomplished mercenary whom he had previously paid well under the table. The mercenary had become wanted after killing a noble's private guard during a dispute. Xanis believed the mercenary's strength rivaled that of the Holy Knights and considered an ordinary bandit no threat by comparison. The mercenary immediately launched his attack. Steel clashed as Gray met the assault head-on before forcing the mercenary back. The mercenary quickly circled behind Gray, struck him, and landed a kick. Seeing this, Xanis regained his confidence, convinced that hiring the mercenary had been the right decision. Moments later, however, Xanis's eyes widened. The mercenary had begun trembling. Unable to understand what had changed despite believing they held the advantage, Xanis watched as Gray slowly broke into a grin. The remaining guards charged in to support the mercenary, only to suddenly freeze in place. One after another, they collapsed to the ground. Stunned, Xanis could only wonder what had just happened. Binding shackles emerged from Gray's body and restrained every guard. Xanis immediately recognized the spell as bind magic. With a grim expression, Gray raised his sword. As Xanis let out a terrified scream, Gray cut down the mercenary. The remaining soldiers panicked, declaring that they no longer wished to fight and begging for their lives. Gray then turned his attention to Xanis. As Xanis repeatedly cursed, Gray recognized him as the slave merchant he had been searching for. Viewing Xanis as nothing more than human filth, Gray decided that there was no need for confessions or prayers before killing him. Afterward, Gray confirmed that the number of people present matched the broker's information. He found himself irritated with the broker, whose report had described the bodyguard as highly skilled. Compared to Londi, however, the wanted spear user had been weaker. Gray searched through the luggage and found a magic bag of higher quality than his own. He decided to give it to Aless when he returned. Inside were valuables and medicines, which he chose to keep as compensation for the inconvenience. At that moment, a voice questioned what had happened. Scrad asked whether Gray alone had been responsible for the massacre. Gray challenged him to consider what it would mean if he had. After a brief silence, Scrad adjusted his glasses and observed Gray. He admitted that, honestly, he did not care, as everyone present had already been destined for the gallows. Gray sensed another presence nearby despite being unable to see it. He concluded that it was either magic or a magic item concealing someone, making the situation troublesome. As Scrad glanced at him, Gray considered his options. If the Holy Knights had only come for Xanis, the situation might still be resolved peacefully. If, however, they were after the children, battle would become unavoidable. Scrad excused himself for failing to introduce himself earlier and identified himself as one of Storia's Holy Knights. He then instructed Meyer to reveal himself, considering it rude not to introduce himself as well. Meyer was visibly surprised and questioned the order. Gray silently watched him. Scrad explained that the Knight Commander had instructed him to look after Meyer's well-being. Before he could finish, Meyer reluctantly complied and introduced himself, insisting that anyone could tell he was a Holy Knight just by looking at him. Gray introduced himself in return as an adventurer. Meyer refused to believe him. Scrad acknowledged that Gray certainly appeared to be an adventurer, though he considered that point irrelevant. Meyer disagreed, insisting that it mattered. Scrad then asked what Gray had been after, wondering if it had been money, since handling Xanis had essentially been the Holy Knight's responsibility. Gray challenged him, asking what obligation he had to answer. Scrad frowned and silence followed. After a pause, Scrad simply asked for permission to recover the merchant's corpse before excusing himself. Gray told him to do as he pleased, and Scrad thanked him. Gray privately noted how easily the Holy Knights had backed down. Meyer angrily demanded to know whether Scrad truly intended to let Gray go. Entering the carriage, Scrad ordered Meyer to comply. Their mission had been to capture Xanis or execute justice on the spot. Since that objective had already been fulfilled, they only needed to return immediately and report the outcome. Meyer reluctantly agreed but continued glaring at Gray. After stepping back out of the carriage, Scrad cast one final glance toward Gray before leaving with Meyer. Once they had gone, Gray let out a sigh. He was uncertain whether he could have faced the two Holy Knights without causing collateral damage. After they had traveled some distance away, Meyer asked Scrad to explain why he had allowed Gray to leave. Scrad questioned what Meyer meant. Meyer replied that the reason was obvious, arguing that no one could defeat two Holy Knights alone, especially with Scrad, the fifth seat, present. He believed that with his cloak of concealment, a surprise attack would have made defeating Gray easy. Privately, Scrad concluded that if Meyer had attempted such an attack, he would already be dead. Although Scrad still did not understand how Gray had done it, Gray had been tracking Meyer's concealed movements almost perfectly without Meyer noticing. Scrad judged that even if they had won a fight there, the cost would have been severe, and even his own survival would not have been guaranteed. Scrad informed Meyer that once they returned, he would once again drill the fundamentals into him. Meyer immediately protested, unable to understand why. Gray entered another carriage and found several frightened children inside. He immediately cursed to himself after realizing that he had forgotten to sheath his sword and wipe away the blood splattered across it. The oldest girl declared that she did not care what happened to her, but pleaded with Gray to spare the other children. Gray explained that he had actually come to rescue them. The girl was visibly surprised. At that moment, Gray heard someone's stomach rumble and asked whether they wanted some apples. The other children tried to stop Liliko, but she walked up to Gray and timidly asked for one. Gray agreed and Liliko thanked him. Gray then pointed out that a single apple would not be enough. He explained that he had a wagon nearby carrying enough food for all of them to eat their fill. The older girl was about to object, but Gray reminded her that if they remained there, they would only become prey to monsters or bandits. When Gray mentioned Aless, the girl immediately interrupted him and asked whether he knew Aless. Gray explained that many things had happened and that Aless was now living with him. Hearing that, the girl smiled in relief, comforted by the knowledge that Aless was safe. Gray realized that he should have mentioned Aless from the beginning. The girl introduced herself as Mia. She explained that she and Aless had grown up together in the same orphanage and considered themselves childhood friends. Gray remarked that Mia had trusted him rather easily and asked whether it had ever occurred to her that he might be deceiving them. Mia reasoned that there was no benefit in deceiving children like them. Gray accepted her reasoning and told the children to wait while he cleaned up the area. As he dragged the bodies into the bushes to hide them, Gray reflected on the way Mia had referred to themselves. Seeing that they had been taken from the orphanage and forced into slavery, he understood why they thought so little of themselves. Realizing that, he considered his own question a foolish one. Mia then told the other children that they would be going with Gray and that Aless was waiting for them. One of the younger boys happily asked whether they would really get to see Aless again. Gray realized that Aless had been like an older brother to the children, though Nina somehow treated Aless more like a younger brother. Thinking of that, Gray found himself eager to return home to his own children. Later, while driving the wagon, Gray looked inside and saw that the children had fallen asleep. He quietly covered them with a blanket. Suddenly, someone outside shouted for the occupants to come out of the wagon, claiming that they would be spared if they cooperated. Gray cursed to himself because the children were sleeping. The man shouted again, demanding that they come out and declaring that his group was not patient with people who ignored them. Gray cursed once more as the men continued banging on the borrowed wagon. Liliko began trembling, and Mia held her close. Crying, Liliko called out for her mother and father. Mia started to explain Liliko's past, but Gray stopped her, deciding that Liliko did not need to remember something so painful. Gray sprinkled magic dust over the children and cast a spell, telling them that everything was only a dream. He urged them to return to sleep and assured them that the bad dream would be over when they woke up. Outside, the men gave the signal to attack while laughing among themselves. Gray responded with a cold sneer, deciding that from that moment onward, it was time for the adults to handle the situation. At the beginning of chapter 18, one of the men surrounding the wagon remarked that his companion had frightened the children too much and that they were now too scared to come out. He also commented that the guards had been cowards. Another man admired the carriage and suggested that instead of selling every woman, they should keep at least one as a slave. Growing impatient, one of them shouted again and kicked the carriage, demanding that its occupants come out and stop making them waste their time. Suddenly, a hand shot out from the carriage and seized the man's head. Gray emerged, remarking that the man had been making noise for quite some time. The surrounding men froze in shock. Gray immediately struck, cutting the man down while condemning them for frightening the children. Realizing that their opponent was another adventurer, one of the men ordered the others to kill him. Gray answered that they were the ones who would die before stomping on the leader's groin. As the leader screamed in agony, Gray beheaded the remaining attackers, spraying blood across the area. He then used his bind magic once more to restrain the survivors. One of the men managed to flee. While desperately running, he regretted approaching in the first place, convinced that none of them would have come near had they known such a monster was there. Gray suddenly appeared behind him with a grin and confronted the fleeing man. Terrified, the man swore that he would never lay a hand on children again and begged to be spared. Gray reflected that people like him were the reason more children ended up suffering like Liliko. Since they had spent their lives stealing from others, Gray decided it was now their turn to lose everything. As the man stared in terror at Gray's widening grin, a single slash echoed through the area. Some time later, the wagon continued rattling along the road. Liliko awoke, believing she had only experienced a frightening dream. Gray quietly checked inside the carriage to see whether the children were awake before telling them that they would arrive soon and could continue sleeping. He promised to wake them when they reached their destination, then closed the carriage door. Liliko tried to remember the contents of her dream but could not. When they arrived at Gray's home, Aless was stunned to see the children. They immediately ran to him, and Aless was overcome with relief that they were safe. Mia remarked that she had been about to say the same thing because Aless had suddenly disappeared, leaving her worried. They embraced, and the other children broke down in tears. Ariamel stated that she would check what they needed to accommodate the additional people. Gray asked her to do so. Nina asked whether everyone was happy. Gray replied that she was right, explaining that if Nina had always wanted to see her family, she would surely be happy too. Nina ran over to him with tears in her eyes, deeply moving Gray. Gray gently poked Nina's cheek. Nina pouted and threw a small tantrum, lightly hitting him. Gray hugged her and apologized for doing something bad. He then hugged Stella and Lutz as well. The children still appeared upset until Fio arrived, and Isoka reminded the three younger children that Gray had work to do. Gray reflected that humans could endure hardship only through strong will. Only by controlling oneself and resisting one's desires could a person truly remain human. Even though he wanted to kiss the children on the cheeks, he refused to give in because it would only make them sadder. Instead, he apologized again while gently squishing the cheeks of Nina, Stella, and Lutz. This time, Nina asked him to poke her cheeks again. Gray happily squished all three of their puffy cheeks once more. Isoka observed that the children were now in good spirits. Fio then asked about Isoka. Isoka insisted that he was fine and already too old for that kind of treatment. Fio teased him, pointing out that he had been watching the younger children with envy for quite a while and that there was nothing strange about wanting to be pampered by a father at their age. Embarrassed, Isoka insisted that he could not ask to be spoiled. Fio suggested they go together and pulled him over to Gray. Before long, Fio and Isoka also had their cheeks squished. Nina then asked Gray whether he was happy to be in his 20s. Although puzzled by the question, Gray answered that he was very happy. Aless soon returned with Mia and Liliko and called out to Gray. After Gray looked over, Aless explained that he had already told them about the situation before thanking Gray for saving both him and the other children. Gray told him not to worry about it, believing it was only natural to help if Aless's family was in trouble. Tears welled up in Aless's eyes. Gray wondered what kind of lives the children had originally lived in bright fantasy. No matter how harsh their future might become, he resolved to bear every burden that would otherwise fall upon them. Even if the path ahead became nothing more than a mountain of corpses and a river of blood, he intended to walk it together with the children. Ariamel informed Gray that she had finished checking what they currently needed. They would require more food, dishes, and bedding. Gray thanked her and said he would buy everything on his way back from returning the carriage. Ariamel reminded him to be careful. Nina called out to her father, but Gray had already left the house. Theo turned to Ariamel and noticed that she was pouting. When Theo asked what was wrong, Ariamel hurried toward the door and denied that anything was bothering her, saying she was going to prepare dinner. Theo pointed out that there were not enough ingredients to cook with, but then suddenly realized something. She turned to Isoka and suggested that he and Ariamel should form a squad to receive cheek squishes from their father. Isoka immediately told Theo that she had better not. At the beginning of chapter 19, the sound of horses echoed as Gray drove the borrowed carriage. As he approached, he wondered how he should apologize. Halsaria suddenly greeted him through the window. Gray explained that he had come to return the carriage. Halsaria remarked that Kasha and Emilia were probably in the conference room and asked whether he wanted to speak with them. Gray replied that he did. Halsaria invited him inside to wait while she went to fetch the other two. Gray was left speechless as she hurried off, then entered the building. Inside, several adventurers from Valkyrie were annoyed to see him, with one asking why he was there. Gray ignored them. Some members of Valkyrie still treated him coldly. There had once been more who openly showed hostility toward him, but thinking back, he realized he had not seen those people lately. In the conference room, Emilia greeted Gray and apologized for making him wait. Gray apologized as well for causing her concern. Emilia insisted that she had not been worried, though she admitted that everything seemed to have worked out in the end. Gray explained that the children were all safe and that he intended to let them continue living at his home. He also mentioned encountering two holy knights. Emilia said she wanted to hear the whole story. As Gray recounted everything that had happened, Halsaria eventually fell asleep. After the discussion continued, Kasha observed that, based on Gray's account, the holy knight with glasses sounded quite skilled and stronger than the one they had encountered before. Halsaria asked whether he was the one who had been castrated the other day. Kasha asked what she meant. Halsaria explained that Gray had done it. Gray corrected her, pointing out that it had actually been Halsaria who shot Londi in the groin. Halsaria replied that she had only followed Gray's instructions. Gray regretted bringing it up. Gray then explained that he had been attacked by bandits on the way home and that the borrowed carriage had been damaged. He apologized for it. Emilia asked if that was really what had happened. Gray confirmed it and asked how much the repairs would cost. Kasha replied that she did not want money. Before Gray could respond, she declared that he should pay with his body instead. Emilia was horrified. Gray answered that because of the children, anything that took too long or was unreasonable would be impossible. Kasha accepted that and explained that she only needed Gray's help with something this time. Emilia then realized what Kasha had actually meant. Kasha said she would explain the details another time. Gray agreed, telling her that she could call on him whenever she needed him. Kasha grinned as she wondered what to do next, privately considering leaving Gray and Emilia alone together. Halsaria commented that Kasha had a rather suspicious look on her face. On the way home, Gray reflected on Kasha's request in exchange for borrowing the carriage. Something about it gave him an uneasy feeling. His thoughts soon shifted back to the children, deciding that the only puffed-up faces he wanted to see were theirs. Gray stopped at a shop where the vendor greeted him. Gray apologized as he usually did, but the vendor told him not to worry and mentioned that there were some particularly good apples that day. Gray initially asked for 2. He then remembered Aless once mentioning that the orphanage only served a small piece of fruit as dessert on special occasions. Changing his mind, Gray decided to buy 8 apples instead. The vendor thanked him. Gray thought that the day was special as well. He planned to slice the apples and serve them as dessert after dinner. He also remembered giving an apple to Lutz before. Watching Lutz happily nibble on it with his tiny mouth was something Gray felt he could watch forever, although he knew Ariamel would get angry if he fed the children too much. His next concern was bedding. Thinking further, he realized that the children from Kodarl were still wearing tattered clothes. He also wondered whether there were enough rooms for everyone. More importantly, he knew he needed to ask the children what they wanted to do. Although he found it troublesome, he decided to seek the innkeeper's advice. When Gray finally returned home, everyone welcomed him back. Ariamel thanked him for going shopping and asked whether he would like some tea. Gray accepted. Looking around the room, he noticed that all the children were present, though they had naturally split into 2 separate groups. He understood that becoming friends overnight was not easy. Gray addressed the children from Kodarl and told them that they were welcome to stay and continue living there. Mia thanked him. Gray then announced that he was going to prepare dinner. Mia asked Gray and Ariamel to let her help. The two exchanged glances. Ariamel admitted that it was difficult to sit by without doing anything and asked Mia to help cut the vegetables. Mia gladly agreed, and another boy volunteered to help as well. Ariamel then asked Nina, Tala, and Lutz to set the table. The three readily agreed. An older girl and boy also offered to help with anything they could. Ariamel accepted their offer and asked them to keep an eye on Nina and the others so they would not drop the dishes. Gray and Isoka watched everyone working together. Isoka remarked that the two of them were just standing there like statues. Gray suggested leaving everything to the other children for the day. Isoka then looked around for Aless. Aless replied that he was standing right beside him. Gray realized that he had not noticed Alessa's presence at all. He concluded that Aless might possess a skill related to concealing his presence, which would be quite valuable. Aless, however, looked gloomy. He admitted that he was not happy at all before apologizing and asking whether he should bring a desk and chair from the storeroom. Before the children began eating, Nina gave thanks for the meal. Ariamel praised her before asking whether the food big sister Mia had prepared was delicious. Nina happily agreed and then declared that Mia was her little sister while she herself was the big sister. She explained that everyone who came to the house after her became her younger brother or sister. Mia wondered whether the order was determined by when everyone had arrived at the house. Aless tried to explain that, since Mia had come after him, she was his little sister as well, and he told her to call Nina big sister. Mia accepted becoming Nina's little sister but refused to become Alessa's, pointing out that she was 1 year older than him. Aless conceded the point, and Mia laughed as she ruffled his hair. Watching the exchange, Gray thought that everyone seemed to be getting along better. Gray stood up from the table and went to retrieve the apples he had bought. After glancing at Ariamel, she remarked that she hoped everyone would be happy. Gray agreed. Theo noticed what the two of them were doing and wondered whether those were apples. Ariamel confirmed that Gray had brought them. Gray explained that they were meant to be dessert after the meal. Aless immediately realized what Gray was trying to do. Gray explained that the day was special as well, so he wanted everyone to enjoy apples together. Aless was deeply moved. Just then, Liliko gently tapped Gray and held out her hands. Gray recalled that when Nina and Stella did that, they wanted a hug, while Lutz usually meant that he wanted something handed to him immediately. Assuming Liliko wanted to help, Gray carefully placed the plate of sliced apples into her hands. Nina volunteered to help as well, and Stella quickly followed. Ariamel remarked that Nina and the others had become quite good at carrying plates and wondered whether she should ask the younger children for assistance. Stella confidently indicated that they could handle it. Ariamel then asked Nina and Stella to carry another plate together before carefully handing them the sliced apples. Liliko quietly watched as Ariamel thanked Nina, and Nina eagerly asked to do it again. Gray praised Liliko for being good at carrying things and told her that she had been a great help. Liliko silently nodded before walking away. Watching her leave, Gray thought that she was a good child and wished she would stop being afraid of him. Gray's thoughts drifted back to his previous life. After losing his family, he had always cooked for himself. He had not started cooking to save money or recreate his mother's meals. Instead, returning to an empty home had been so difficult that he needed something to occupy himself. Over time, his cooking had improved considerably from when he first began. Even so, he remembered always giving thanks before eating. Meals eaten alone had never been enjoyable. Now, however, his home was full of people. The younger children busily enjoyed their meal together. After everyone finished cleaning up, they took turns bathing. Bedtime followed afterward. Since Gray, Ariamel, and the younger children all shared a room, he believed everything would be fine. Once the meal was over and every plate had been cleaned completely, Gray suggested that the older children could use Ariamel's room, reasoning that Ariamel would be staying in his room anyway, so it would not be a problem. Mia was visibly shocked by the suggestion. Aless immediately hurried to explain that it was absolutely not what Mia was thinking and that she should read the room better. Theo quietly noted that Mia had misunderstood as well. Gray could only wonder what everyone was talking about. Before he could think further, a sleepy Lutz tugged on his clothes while Stella informed him that the three younger children were getting sleepy. Gray agreed that it was time. Ariamel went over to the drowsy Nina, knowing that if the children fell asleep where they were, they would catch a cold. Gray then looked toward Aless, Mia, Theo, and Isoka and asked Isoka and Theo for a favor. Theo readily agreed, while Isoka wished everyone good night. As Aless and the others continued making a commotion, Gray found himself wondering whether anyone besides the younger children was actually sleepy.